Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Chatham Select Board meeting of September 6, 2022. Let the record show that the meeting commenced at 5:32 p.m. I'll read what I'm supposed to read every meeting pursuant to Governor Baker's July 16, 2022 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, until March 31, 2023. This meeting of the Chatham Select Board is being conducted via in-person and remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in that order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410, conference ID 203-386-491#, or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. While this is a live broadcast and simulcast on Channel 18, despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access. We will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. Okay, first order of business, a roll call of the members of the board. Mr. Metters.
Present.
Mr. Shell.
Present.
Ms. Davis.
Present.
Mr. Nicastro.
Present.
And the chair is obviously present as well. First order of business, the minutes of August 30th, 2022. A motion to move them, to approve.
Motion to approve?
Thank you, sir.
Second.
Okay, comments, edits, suggestions? I see Mr. Nicastro's hands up, and then Mr. Shell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two sets. On page 6, third paragraph, motion by, the name is left out. I believe it was myself that offered that motion on the school vacancy. And then on page 8, I've got a few relative to the discussion up at the top on the Eldridge voting, because I think it doesn't, what's there is accurate, but it doesn't reflect the whole conversation. So here's what I have. In the third line, before the word characterized, I'd like to insert comma by several members, comma. So it would read, the agreement's terms overall were by several members characterized as good and the possibility of running short of funds is remote. In the next paragraph, I'd like to add at the end of the second sentence the following, comma, and some members indicated they would support the agreement reluctantly, period. So I'll read that sentence. Some hesitancy was expressed due to the use restrictions, comma, and some members indicated they would support the agreement reluctantly. And then in the fourth paragraph, Town Council Costello, I would like to strike the word said and put opined, and then it would continue, a change to the agreement would, I'd like to insert the word likely, would likely be made if the consideration being offered by the grantor is not fulfilled, and then add comma, but he acknowledged that this is a gray area. So I'll read the whole sentence again. Town Council Costello opined that a change to the agreement would likely be made if the consideration being offered by the grantor is not fulfilled, comma, but he acknowledged that this is a gray area. And those are my proposed edits.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nicastro. I'm sure Shauna will watch the film again. Mr. Shell.
Thank you. My first, I got to find it now. On page 4, in the first full paragraph, the paragraph that begins Ms. Cummings, in the second line, I think the word them should be then. And then with Mr. Nicastro's agreement, I'm fine with the changes that you propose, but in particular, I thought this was expressed, I thought it was an opinion as well. And so I would, I think you said likely be made. I think, I would say likely be occasioned, since that would have to be a mutual agreement if a change is to be made. And I think that's, I don't remember exactly what he said, but that was my sense of what he said. And then in the, down below in the motion, by Mike Shell to approve and accept, I think the word "and" is missing. And then at the end of that motion where it says entering into the contract as presented. And then in the last paragraph on page 8, second line, which begins residential tax exemption, she noted the Cape Towns, put an S on town. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Shell. Any others? Okay. Been moved and seconded. Mr. Nacastro?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Mr. Metters?
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda are public announcements and agenda item requests. I'll turn to the board first. Mr. Metters, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple things to bring up. First, I'd like to take a moment to read the board committee commission vacancies as of September 1st, 2022, for all those who might be interested in serving the community in some fashion. Going to highlight the Monomoy Regional School Committee. We had a recent member step down. So we have one opening. We have applications for this position with the deadline of October 1st, 2022. So if anyone's interested, please submit applications to the town. And on our board and committees, we have Aunt Lydia's Cove Committee, 1, Cable Advisory Committee, 1, Cape Cod National Seashore Advisory Committee, 1, Committee for the People with Disabilities, 2 associate, Conservation Commission, 3 associate, Cultural Council, 4, Economic Development Committee, 3, Historic Business District Commission, 1 alternate, Human Services Advisory Committee, 1, Independence Day Parade Committee, 1, Local State Building Code Board of Appeals, 4, North Beach Advisory Committee, 5, Open Space Committee, 1 regular, 1 alternate, Pleasant Bay Alliance Representative, 1, Public Ceremonies Committee, 3, Railroad Museum Group, 1, South Coastal Harbor Plan Committee, 1, Summer Residence Advisory Committee, 1 associate, Traffic Safety Committee, 1 regular, 1 alternate, and Wastewater Intermunicipal Agreement Advisory Board, 1. Members serve 3-year term, associates and alternates serve a 1-year term. Non-resident taxpayers are eligible to serve on Advisory Committee, the Cultural Council, and the Council of Aging Board of Directors. Only those registered to vote in Chatham are eligible to serve on regulatory and statutory boards and commissions. So if you're interested, we have a spot for you. And 2 item requests. They're somewhat queued up, but I'd like to get them, put my 2 cents worth. On the back of our future select board agenda items, it says projects reminder for updates. I think based on recent emails that I've seen, I think it would be beneficial for the full board just to have a short discussion on the fisherman storage area. That's moving forward, but I don't think I should be the only member that is aware of some of the things going on. I just want to get that out for us to discuss. And then the other one, which appears to be queued up for September 22, is the Route 28 Main Street Kroll Road intersection project. I'd like to, press that we do have it in September because, as citizens kind of make their way away for the winter to warmer climates, possibly, I think it's a September timetable to have this discussion makes a whole lot of sense. So I would just be supportive of keeping that on track.
Which one was that, Corey? I'm sorry.
The Route 28 Main Street Kroll Road intersection project, it is queued up for September 2022, so
Yeah.
I think if we could keep on that, I think that'd be ideal.
Right, okay.
Cool, that's it.
We adhere to that. Mr. Nacastro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one agenda item request, and it kind of stems from our action last week on the Eldridge Garage property. The nature of the donation being anonymous and the implications of the open meeting law limiting what the board can do. But with respect to those types of potential donations, I'd like to see, in the future, I'd like to see a discussion of the appropriate role of the Select Board in regard to the negotiation and acceptance of anonymous monetary donation agreements which commit discretionary authority to the donors and which incur obligations upon the town over the development and use of town property. I really would like to see a discussion of that, on how we would deal with those types of situations going forward.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else on the board? Agenda item requests and/or announcements? From the public, agenda item requests, and public announcements. Okay, anybody online, an agenda item request and/or public announcement? Okay. Hearing and seeing no hands raised there or here, we will move on. First update this evening is our drinking water testing and pumping update, and any consideration of amendments to our water conservation restrictions. And Tom Temple is online, and there he is. Tom, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Select Board.
If I wasn't
Yes,
mistaken,
Tom
we had
Temple,
rain today.
Director of Public Works.
Thank you, Tom. Go. You're good.
Yep. Just to let you know, an update for the water pumpage side of things. We pumped for the month of August 4,795,400 gallons less than we did the same time last year for the month of August, which equates to 5.7% less. Wells currently are only running between 7 and 11 hours per day. The mandatory ban and enforcement that we have in place seems to be working. We have not hit a low-level alarm on the tanks this past week, which was great. That gives us an update for the pumping side of things with respect to well number 5, the temporary treatment. We did do our sampling for PFAS sampling for well 5. That took place today. Weston and Sampson continues to install the emergency connection between wells number 8 and the PFAS filter. And we did receive quotes for the fencing, which they should commence work shortly for that. With respect to the timeline, well number 8 modifications remaining, the site work should be scheduled to be completed sometime in late September. For the permanent side of things, the water treatment construction costs were returned from our third-party vendor. We did receive that, and the SRF loans were applied for on August 12th, and it looks like we've requested $19.8 million for that. Weston and Sampson completed a 60% design submittal, and the water treatment design from Massachusetts goes through MEPA. Weston and Sampson will compile and submit all the necessary applications before the year's end. So with respect to construction, the funding appropriated, we're looking at the regular May 2023 town meeting. We would shortly advertise for July 2023, and we anticipate September for construction award if all goes well. With respect to well number 10, project coordination, we're working with T.W. Nickerson. That work, working in conjunction where we're heading right adjacent to his property for wells 10 and 11. Everything seems to be going well with them. Weston and Sampson has provided our other consultant for the sewer side of things, GHD, with the necessary plans for the proposed 12-inch upgrade of the water main that's earmarked for Mill Hill Road. And Robert B. Auer began site work. You'll see in the packet some pictures of the road that they established where they did the erosion control, tree removal, staking of the entrance, and providing the access road. That's really all I have at this point. With respect to the pumpages that I mentioned early on, things are going fairly well, and people are paying attention to what we've asked of them. And it's showing in our daily pumpage where we're only down to like 7 to 11 hours per day. So I'm very thankful on that side of things. If anybody has any question, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Tom. Questions from the Select Board? Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I think I'm going to direct to Dr. Duncanson, Tom, but thank you for the report. I appreciate it. Dr. Duncanson, this afternoon you sent us our groundwater levels for Brewster USGS. Do you have those slides available so you can show the public what's going on and give a little overview of the water levels?
Yes, give me a second here. Let me share my screen. And I will pull those up. Can you all see the screen with groundwater levels?
Yes.
Okay, so these are the groundwater levels as measured in 2 United States Geological Survey monitoring wells. The upper one is located in Chatham at the intersection roughly of Route 137 and Route 28. The bottom one is located in Brewster, Mass, up towards between Route 6 and Route 6A. And as you can see, these levels go back. I took them back to January 2019, and you can see in 2019 and early 20, we had what I would call kind of a typical pattern, where we had higher groundwater levels in the late spring, following, winter snow melt and winter precipitation. We then dropped down to low levels in the summer of 2019, and then we rebound again to roughly the same levels in the wintertime in 2020. But then subsequent to that, when we see summer of 2020 arrive, we see a substantial dip in both wells, the beginning, if you will, of the drought. Then in the wintertime, so in January of 2021, we do see some rebound, but nowhere near as much rebound as we saw in 2019 and 2020. We then see the typical summer drop in both wells, and then the rebound again in January of 2022. Again, not as great a rebound as we saw in 2019 and 2020. And then since then, at the tail end on the right-hand side of the graphs, you'll see that both wells are on that downward trend again, which is normal for the summer fall period. But the important thing here is, we're starting out that trend just like we did last year from a much lower level to begin with in the wintertime. And this is especially dramatic in the Brewster well, which is towards the height of the so-called Monomoy lens, if you will, and is used by many of the water districts in the Monomoy lens as kind of the bellwether monitoring well. And the other important thing to note is on the far right-hand side, so the most recent number coming from that well, it's actually lower now than it was at this time last summer. So groundwater levels in that area are actually lower than they were at the same period last summer, which, is not good news as we go into the fall season. Now, as we all know, demand drops off in the fall because we have less tourists, less second homeowners here. But still, it's going to take fairly substantial rainy fall, winter to get these levels back up to where they would normally be. And so with that kind of broad explanation, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Super, thank you, Bob.
So this you've been recording this since 2019, and we've seen a steady decline every year during the summer. We're not rebounding, and right now we're at critical drought and only had 0.04 inches of rain today. I want to encourage community members, whether they have a well or don't, to just think and consider about what the future is going to look like for water in this community and on the Cape, and to really be mindful to try to plant drought-resistant plants and not to excessively water your lawns.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. DeCastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just apropos of what Board Member Davis was mentioning, I would like to mention for the benefit of the public that the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee is going to hold its first meeting in a long time this coming Monday at 11 a.m. here in the annex. I'm not sure which room. I think it's next door in the small room. I don't think that is a broadcast meeting. Is it, Jill, do you know, or Shanna, do you know? It's just a recorded meeting, but if anyone wishes...
Yeah, it will not be a live meeting.
Yeah, but they will be touching upon the master plan that we've asked them to come up with in terms of water for the town, and I think it will be the beginning of a discussion of the infrastructure additions that we're hoping for, like additional well or wells. So I think everyone should pay attention to the work of that very important committee. Thank you.
Dean, what were the dates and times again? I'm sorry.
It's September, what's the date, Bob? It's 11 o'clock next Monday,
September 12th.
September 12th.
Yep, 9/12.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Okay. Any other questions or comments for Dr. Bob? Yeah, I would just echo Selectman Davis's, Select Board Member Davis's notions of let's all, we're in this together and please conserve as best we can. Again, as I said last week, and I'm just trying to keep my plants alive. That's all I'm trying to do at this point, just alive. Mr. Nacastro.
I do have one other point. I don't know if there's any, well, I guess there is a comment from the public, so I'll wait until public member speaks.
It looks as though Gloria had her hand up first. Gloria? Gloria Freeman?
Thank you. This is Gloria Freeman. As you are aware, municipal water use and private well water use sometimes provide equity issues when it comes to restrictions. There are letters to the editor and posts about this on social media. After hearing staff say that the regulation of private wells is not legal, I did some research, which led me to the Massachusetts Model Water Use Restriction Bylaw. I'll refer to it as Model Bylaw. Excuse me. I sent a copy of it, as well as other relevant material, to you and to staff. After finding the model bylaw, I also engaged in a series of emails with Dwayne Levangie, who is the Massachusetts DEP Water Management Act Program Chief. I sent you today an email from Mr. Levangie, which confirms that with the adoption of a bylaw, like the model bylaw, communities may regulate private wells. I hope that you were going to hear from town council on his opinion of this today. And I hope you will consider asking staff to draft such a bylaw to protect and improve the well-being of the Chatham community in the future, because drought management extends well beyond the current crisis. Mr. Levangie sent me, and I sent it to you, the basis for the state to recommend restrictions on private well owners, which was the Massachusetts River Alliance paper entitled Private Irrigation Well Non-Essential Use Restrictions. Based in part on this document, the state provided the model bylaw. And if you will allow me, I would like to read just the conclusion of that document. It's one short paragraph. Yeah, go ahead, quote, though the precise impact of private irrigation wells can and should be further investigated, the hydrologic reality is that these water withdrawals deplete our shared groundwater reserves. Bylaw adoption at the local level and regulatory changes at the state level can ensure that private irrigation well owners do their part to protect these reserves during the outdoor watering season. The state should give cities and towns the support they need to pass these important bylaws, as municipalities may encounter opposition to regulating irrigation wells. To sustain summertime water levels in wetlands, rivers, and streams, and to protect local drinking water supplies, it is essential to establish common sense standards for all outdoor watering, end quote. To end, the Monomoy lens like all of the Cape Cod aquifer, is a finite resource shared by both public water system users and private wells that draw from it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gloria. I think Mr. Nacastro has his hand up, and then we'll go to Ms. Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following up on what Ms. Freeman has just said, and I appreciate the material that she sent to us. I had a chance really just to skim the latest document that was from the Rivers Group. But I did request an opinion of town council. I believe he has, he has completed it, and there was, I think, some back and forth in that process. I would assume, Mr. Chairman, you're going to put this on a future agenda for
Absolutely.
discussion.
Either next week or the week after.
Yeah,
hopefully.
and we should probably release that opinion as a matter of public record. And we should hear from Dr. Duncanson at that meeting as well, because he has made some comments about the depths of private wells versus public wells. And we heard from the Summer Residence Committee last week on it. So all of that information should be on the table whenever we discuss this, so we can have a thorough and informed investigation
Yeah,
of
and
the issue.
I think it's valuable for the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee as well, Mr.
Yes,
So I think
yes,
it's
we
good
should
input for
probably
them.
get an opinion from them at some point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Metters, and then off to Mr. Gibbs.
Just going to put my 2 cents on one thing. I think as we proceed with all these conversations, I definitely think we need to accept the fact that we got to get the data more up to date. Dr. Duncanson sent a email with a list of different, irrigation systems and stuff that have been put in at various dates. Some of the older systems that weren't done electronically, another pocket from 2014 to present. And full transparency, I was perplexed because I have a well, it is off. I'm not in the system. I had the town come out, make sure I was capped off, the whole 9 yards. I went through the permitting and everything. But there's clearly no data saying that I have this well. So if you think you're a registered property with the town, you may not be. And I'll on my own have to follow up with the town to take my own situation out. But just running through the list of properties, I mean, I know there was a dozen properties that off the top of my head, I thought, well, there's one there, one there, one there, one there. So, and that was a little snapshot of the town. So I think as we have these discussions about what we're going to do, how we're going to properly, govern it, how we're going to enforce it, having proper data would be extremely important. And I don't know how we collect all that. I do think we are getting more information coming in, which has been very helpful. I think some of this is bringing in data, but there's clearly some pockets of information that we need to fill in. So just want to put that out there. Data is very important, and it'll be helpful for future discussions.
Thank you, Corey. On to Ms. Gibbs, had her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we're going to get a handle on this until we can get enough storage and pumping capacity, I think there are some inconsistencies and loopholes that should be amended in any ban moving forward. These are basically housekeeping, but I think they're important in terms of equity. 1D states washing of hand surfaces, sidewalks, patios, driveways, citing personal vehicles or washing boat hulls upon hauling are prohibited. The exceptions is that boats may be rinsed to remove debris associated with fishing activities, such as gutting, descaling, etc. Such as and etc. leave these restrictions open to interpretation. The exception does not say commercial fishermen. Therefore, as it reads, recreational boaters, many who are not residents, can wash off their boats after a day of recreational fishing, but residents cannot wash off their vehicles, their necessary form of transportation of bird droppings that can eat through the paint finish on our cars. Number 2 says outdoor hand watering is limited to Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, midnight to 7, or between 5 to 9. The midnight to 7, I don't believe is realistic and should not be considered an option. In my opinion, the town should not be advising that it is safe to water by hand in the middle of the night in the dark. My cameras have picked up packs of coyotes this summer, and I certainly would not want to go out there and water, and I don't think we should be recommending it. In my opinion, the town should not be, it also says exceptions to the restrictions include core functions of a business, such as landscape nursery centers. Core function is not defined. The term such as leaves this wide open to interpretation. Any Are power washing companies exempt when they can power wash siding and roofing? It is core to their business, and they are advertising, and I see their trucks around town. Marinas, they may be limited by number one, that only boats can remove debris associated with fishing activities, but they could be exempt under this criteria. And the same with builders, who can argue that it is a core part of their business, mixing concrete for foundations, pouring pool construction that they cannot finish otherwise, power washing the house after construction, power washing patios or masonry material, and installing landscaping, all would be considered core to their business. I think moving forward, if there are core businesses, they have to be listed, so it's very clear who is not considered a core business. With respect to irrigated properties, we were told in March when the water ban was extended that there are 1,328 registered irrigation systems. Back in 2018 or 19, it was mandated that all registered irrigation systems must install a meter by January of 2021 or a well installed. That was extended to January of 2022 because of COVID. To date, of those 1,328 registered systems, only 477 homeowners have installed meters as required and are now being charged a higher water rate as a consequence. Rather than just sending out random letters to homeowners who have green lawns or have water running down the street, as is a routine even up till yesterday on Pond Street, with no penalties so far, town staff has those records of the 1,328, those records for the 477 with meters, and they should have a list of permits pulled for a well permit. Those may be in a different department, and those two departments are not coordinating. Residents have been told to install wells as the alternative so that treated water was not being used and that irrigation from wells overnight would go back into the aquifer. That may or may not be true, as we hear tonight. Just by cross-referencing those lists, months ago, letters could have gone out to those 840 homeowners that did not install a meter by January 22 as required and notified that they will be charged a higher rate, as those who have already complied are being charged and will be fined until they comply. Regulations mean absolutely nothing if they're not enforced. It's also assumed that there are hundreds of irrigation systems that have never been registered with the town. It's my understanding that water and sewer can see spikes in overnight water usage by property address, indicating irrigating at night. They could be cross-referenced as well, and they should be sent letters if they are not already metered or on a well. But I also think that the biggest elephant in the room, impacting water usage that has to date not been addressed, are rental properties. The Board of Health had a meeting several weeks ago where they are attempting to get a handle on this. And they were recently told that there are between 700 and 1,000 properties registered with the state as rental properties, and many are advertising 3-bedroom homes, sleeping 20. It is becoming a very serious problem, an issue for them, and it should be for the entire town. Only those properties that use rental agencies are recorded with the state, as 1099s must be issued. It's estimated there are hundreds more that rent on a daily or weekly basis privately. So I would suggest that as big an issue as irrigation systems are, non-resident investment rental properties, when our population can go from 6,000 to potentially 30,000, we really don't know because we haven't counted, and the rental season is going to get longer. That's when we see the significant spikes in water usage. The board can request today that list of properties be provided by the state, and along with the Board of Health, consider some type of action that restricts occupancy and water usage of rental properties. Until we do this, the problem is only going to get worse. So I would recommend that this document address the inconsistencies and loopholes with no such as or et cetera concerning who and what is exempt, act on those homeowners that are in continued violation, and to address rental properties. Our homes are our primary investment, and there are significant prohibitive financial implications for not being allowed to do the very minimum to maintain them. I put myself on a well, I have not used it, and I have no problem with any restriction as long as the rules apply to everyone. I do have a problem when certain classes are either exempted for questionable or unclear reasons or are in non-compliance with no consequences. I think we have the ability to do it. This is going to be a long-term problem, and I think now that the summer is over, this is the time to address it and to get our record straight and to get letters out and to make sure before the end of the year people are in compliance. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. You make a lot of points, and there's a lot of work to be done. I don't argue with it one iota, but there's a lot to unpack. There's a laundry list of items that I think have merit. And we've got work to do, and the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee has work to do, and we've got a lot. This is a serious issue, arguably our most serious issue. Rental properties is an issue, I agree with you. But, and climate change is an issue as well, but we'll get there, but it's gonna take a lot of hard work, and we're gonna have to roll up our sleeves, and we're gonna rely on our experts on the Water Sewer Advisory Committee and our experts elsewhere to help us get it done. I see Bob Duncanson's hand is up, and I didn't know whether Jill wanted to comment on Mr. Metter's comments about folks signing up on their irrigation systems. Bob, please. I
Yeah,
see your
thank
hand up.
you.
Yep.
I just wanted to respond to Corey's comment about the list that I sent out today and the fact that he may or may not be on that list for his irrigation system. What I sent out earlier today are from the records of the Health Department for well construction permits. They do not indicate systems that have been registered through DPW under the irrigation system requirement. So those two lists could in fact be different. And part of my reason for sending that out today was to indicate what records we do have on well construction permits. And then that information can then be joined with the DPW's information on what addresses have signed up and registered their irrigation systems. Ideally, we'd like to be able to do this through GIS, and we are currently looking at least the data starting in 2014, when that was entered into our online permit tracking system in the Health Division. We believe we can generate that in a fashion that we could create a GIS data layer to indicate all those properties that had well construction permits pulled for irrigation systems. And then, the older data, the 1991 through 2013 data, that we're looking at as a job potentially for an intern, because that would have to all be done manually because the data does not exist to electronically do it. So the intent there was specifically that, to marry up well construction permit information in the Health Division with the irrigation system registration information that DPW has, to try to get a better handle on the whole irrigation system issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bob. Any comments? Jill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're working on our data compilation as well through the cross-departmental checks and surveying various homeowners to provide us that information. So we're working on it. We've had letters drafted, and we're due to go out. We had some issues with our printer and envelope supply, so we're looking to do as much electronically and then have a targeted list, not all property owners, but water accounts and so forth. Probably more data than that the DPW can speak to than I can right now. So we're working on getting that information, and again, notifications, and working as best we can to try to get compliance. So I'm happy to bring back the water conservation restrictions next week. We can also provide town council's opinion. There was some back and forth. I'm not sure that was resolved yet, but we can certainly check on that tomorrow, and you can have it for review for next week.
Super. Okay, good. That's good. It's been out there a couple meetings now. Anything else on water? Anything else on water online? Anybody have a hand up?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I'm sorry, who's that?
It's Gloria
Oh,
Freeman
Gloria.
again.
All right, hi, Gloria. Gloria, I've got a hand up here. I'm going to allow this gentleman to speak before you. You've already spoken this evening, and I'm going to have this gentleman speak here. I think it's Mr. Timpson.
Certainly.
Mr. Timpson.
Sorry.
Yep, it's okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm Jeff Fugelstad. I just had an operation, so I'm a little slow. But
Okay.
I wonder, given the list that Ms. Gibbs presented, if there's any way in the next 2 to 3 weeks that the items on that list can be prioritized. It seems like a long list, but there are certain things on that list which have been brought up before, like the number of individuals per home, per rental home. And I think that would be an easy one to solve in order to restrict the number of individuals to two bedrooms, to two to a bedroom or whatever. The second item that I haven't heard addressed, and referring to Dr. Duncanson, that in Brewster, I think there's a well. Are other towns being contacted to see what they're doing in relation to using water from the same lens? And I think that would be.
Bye, Rich.
I think that would be a good place to start, to make sure that other towns are in compliance. Has anyone considered that? Dr. Duncanson?
If I might, I can jump in here. When we met with the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee, one of the items we agreed upon is that we'd treat this lens as a regional lens. So Jeff Colby and Dr. Bob and others agreed that it would be better to communicate with our, especially Harwich, who was ahead of us on their ban, their conservation restriction measures. So it's on the table at the Water Sewer Advisory Committee. It's a no-brainer. If we have a lens that's shared by 4 or 5 towns, and we ought to share information, we ought to manage it collectively and regionally. So that is on the table. You make an excellent point. It's already on the table.
Thank you very much.
And Ms. Davis?
I might add that the Cape and Islands Municipal Leaderships Association is going to be working with the town managers and to discuss regional opportunities like this in our meeting, I believe, in October.
And never mind the 4 or 5 towns that rely on this lens, how about the entire Cape that's relying on an ever-diminishing source of water? So this is region, this is macro region, and it's, New England at this point, although they got rain yesterday. But it seems to me that this drought, I don't have the data in front of me, this drought has been at least the last 2 or 3 years, we've had the same experience. We have, so now, and again, as I'm repeating myself, but there's a lot to unpack, and there's a lot of work to be done, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us, a lot of thoughtful work. But it's people over plants, I guess, and people over boats, and people over cars. I mean, at some point you make those choices. We have to have enough potable water in the town. Rentals is a whole huge issue, and we maybe learn from other communities. We have some research to do there, but that's a whole other huge issue, and it's a major issue in town here for a host of reasons, perhaps not the least of which is water. Okay. Anybody else out there? Gloria, you wanted to speak again? Please keep it brief. You've had your airing tonight.
Yes, all I would like to do is suggest that the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee be a live meeting on Channel 18 so the public can participate through Teams. As Select Board Member Nicastro said, this is a very important committee. They're looking at very important issues. And I would like to think that it's live and that the public can participate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gloria. I see Peter Kokolas' hand is up. Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wrap it up for something simple because there's been a number of letters to the editor and other discussions. Could Dr. Duncanson just explain one more time what it means to have a single source aquifer?
Dr. Bob, you still there?
Yes, I'm here. A single source aquifer is a designation from US EPA, and it basically means that an area has no other potential source or supply for drinking water. In this case, the Cape as a whole, the only place we get our water from is the groundwater beneath our feet. We don't have the luxury, say, of Boston, where they get water through the MWRA from a reservoir system located out in central Mass. Any water that we want on the Cape has to come from what's beneath our feet. We don't have any pipes that go under the canal, and could tie into the MWRA. We don't have any pipes under the canal that go into other areas in Bourne or Plymouth or anything like that. So a sole source aquifer simply means you only have one place that you can get your water from, and therefore, if that supply were ever compromised, you'd definitely be up the creek without any water.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bob. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Bob. Any other comments from the public online or in present or from the board itself? Mr. Shell, please.
Just a quick technical, sort of quasi-legal point. I think town council's opinion may be of some significance on Monday. I'd like to ask that he be asked to reconsider that in light of the form bylaw on regulation of water that Gloria Freeman submitted.
Go ahead, Jill.
So are you asking him to review that form bylaw?
Yes, in the context of his opinion.
Okay.
And I'm happy to speak directly with him if that would help, but I just want to put that on the table, that I think, and no reservation about the bylaw, I think it says something about what he was opining on.
It does indeed. Okay. All righty then. Nothing else on water this evening. Okay. On to our public hearing. We have a public hearing this evening on our tax rate classification. It's, we set the tax rate for next fiscal year. We have a presentation or information that we asked of Alex and Dale Kelly. Alex, the finance director, and Dale Kelly, the director of assessing here in Chatham, will give us a summary of their findings, and then we'll turf it to the select board, and then we'll open it up to a public hearing. So, Dale? Welcome, Dale.
Thank you.
Is it-
Alex will not be here this evening. She's away on vacation. So each year we come before you after the budget and after our values have been reviewed and set by the Department of Revenue. They've approved our values, and here I am before you before we submit the tax recap. Each year you have 4 options that are available. The residential factor, which would shift the tax burden from the resident and open space classes to the commercial, industrial, and personal property classes. Option 2, open space discount, which would shift the tax burden from the open space property to the residential property class. Option 3 is the residential exemption, which would shift the tax burden within the residential class from residents to part-time residents. Option 4, small business exemption, which would shift the tax burden within the commercial, industrial, and personal property classes from certain small commercial properties to other commercial industrial properties. The FY23 values, as I stated, have been approved. The total value of the town will increase 20.43%, and the residential class average is 20.78% over the FY22 values. The valuation is based on calendar year 2021 real estate sales. In our little packet here, we have shown you the before and after. For an example, residential was $7,747,671,899. In FY23, it's $9,357,421,975. That's the increase that I stated of 20.78%. The average residential value was $1,264,346. The Board of Assessors met on August 25th, 2022, to discuss the options and vote on their recommendations to the Select Board. The BOA recommendation and justification thereof are explained at the end of this report. In advance of this hearing, as you know, the board had several meetings devoted to the property tax relief option that are available to the year-round property owners in Chatham. The most recent held on August 30th, 2022. In the agenda packet for the meeting, we listed veterans, blind, senior clause exemptions allowed under Massachusetts general law, as well as the option to defer tax payments under Clause 41A, which is the tax for deferral. As noted in that report at the meeting, information and on these options is available from the assessing office and on the town's website at www.chatham-ma.gov. The residential exemption, Mass General Law, Chapter 59, 5C, The other exemption available to year-round property owners is the residential exemption, on which the Select Board must vote as part of the tax classification hearing. Although it can be voted at any time prior to the tax classification hearing, provided the vote is taken at public meeting. The Select Board must vote to adopt or not adopt the residential exemption each year prior to or at the tax reclassification hearing, usually held in August. At the hearing, the estimated tax rates are presented, as well as the break-even point, when a residential taxpayer will pay more if their property is above that point. What does the residential exemption do? The residential exemption shifts the property tax burden within the residential class from the lower valued residential properties to the higher value residential properties, from properties owned by year-round residents to the vacation homes, and to residential properties not occupied by the owner. The residential exemption increases the residential tax rate. It neither adds nor subtracts from the residential class tax levy, except for rounding, which is then distributed over less assessed value. It does not raise any additional revenue. The exemption does not lower the property tax burden of all property owners in the residential class, necessarily help all the elderly residential property owners. Oftentimes, the elderly convey their property to a trust where they may possibly lose legal or beneficial interest in the property and disqualify themselves to the exemption. If adopted, the residential exemption raises the tax rate for the residential class, Class 1 only. This is due to the fact that the town must still raise the same amount of money of revenue from Class 1 while granting an exemption to qualified property owners. Now, on August 30th, 2022 meeting follow-up, the discussion last week centered on this option, and the board asked several questions which are addressed below. Also included in this report is information from last week's report, specifically tables showing what an exemption would mean for the owners of property valued at $500,000, $750,000, and $1 million, and information, comments from other towns. As noted on August 30, 2022, staff recommended that if the Select Board is interested in the residential exemption, that it not be voted tonight and instead be reviewed in late fall, so that if approved, there is sufficient time to educate property owners, upgrade software, and collect necessary documentation for implementation. At the meeting last week, the board requested additional information from towns that have adopted the residential exemption. These are listed on our packet, and I will just state a few. The data. There's total residential properties are 7,401. Parcels valued at $500,000 and below are 316 parcels, 4%. Parcels valued between $500,000 and $1 million is 1,045, 14%. Parcels valued below $1 million is 1,361. The board requested that we survey other towns that adopted the residential exemption for certain data, in addition to what was included on the meeting August 30th, 2022. The percentage of secondary homeowners: Nantucket, 80%, Truro, 78%, Wellfleet, 65%, Provincetown, 80%. What is the average tax savings in each of the towns? Nantucket, $2,164, Truro, $1,094, Wellfleet, $1,225. Provincetown was busy last week and had short of staff, so we couldn't get that number. The following questions were posed to the assessing offices in each town. Over the years that your towns have had with the residential exemption, has it shown to keep year-rounders in town? Question number 1. Question 2. Has your split changed between year-round seasonal due to the residential exemption, or has it basically just a tax break for residents with no influence on the year-round population numbers? Wellfleet responded, as I said at our meeting last week, and that meeting they're referring to was a Barnstable County Assessing Association meeting. No one leaves, in my humble opinion, solely because of the real estate tax bill. They might leave because of the totality of the various difficulties of living on the Cape: seasonality, expensive housing, low wages, shortage of well-paying jobs. Also, I don't believe anyone moves here year-round just to get $1,224.79 off their tax bill. They would have moved here for other reasons. We have many COVID refugees applying for the exemption, so we'll take close monitoring to see how long they stay, and many, many new applicants this year. Nantucket. Honestly, this is tough to measure, and of course, it is complicated. In a vague sort of general sense, the residential exemption does help to keep year-rounders, or would help to keep them on the island. However, there are other factors. Even with the $2,000 off their tax bill, year-rounders face other financial pressures, cost of living, etc. Also, with the high price of our real estate, many year-rounders have sold out and left the island, and that would happen regardless of the exemption. In theory, it would help keep year-rounders here, but our split between year-rounders and seasonal hasn't changed historically from year to year. So I guess if anything, it helps to keep the status quo. We are about 80% seasonal and 20% year-round. Now, Nantucket was asked additional questions were posed to them. Why has it worked for Nantucket? It helps offset tax bills for residents who qualify for the exemption and assigns more of the tax burden to those who are not year-round property owners and who arguably potentially create the need for more infrastructure and seasonal services. The residential exemption works on Nantucket due to the high value of our real property, and approximately 80% of our property owners are seasonal. The residential exemption shifts a portion of the tax burden away from the lower valued properties, presumably those owned by year-rounders, onto the high value property, presumably those owned by seasonal residents. The amount of tax to be raised by the residential class remains the same, just the lower value properties are getting a break, quote unquote, the exemption, and the break is paid for by properties not receiving the exemption. Question number 2, what is the percentage of eligible properties actually receiving the exemption? Has the number of properties that qualify for the exemption increased or decreased? We don't know that exact number of eligible properties. The residential exemption requires that taxpayers both own and reside in their property as their legal domicile. We rely on the individual property owner to apply for the exemption. We do not seek out applicants. Given that we only have a mailing address where the tax bill is being sent to, we don't necessarily know whether a property is year-round or not until the taxpayer applies for the exemption. Having said that, our split between year-rounders and seasonal owners has kept steady at roughly 80-20 for many years. Question 3, is there data that has worked as an incentive to keep or retain year-round families in Nantucket? Their response, I am not aware of any such data. And does the town survey residents? No. Question 4, has there been any attempts to rescind the residential exemption? Not recently. 5, any other comments regarding successes or lessons learned? Nantucket adopted the residential exemption and the split tax rate for an FY 1981. We have had it ever since. Although initially the exemption was a flat amount of $10,000, which was gradually changed over the years by the Mass Department of Revenue to become a percentage of the average residential value. Excuse me. The non-voting taxpayers reacted very negatively. As a result, the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers was established. And actually, that group has grown into a good group to work with. Even though they don't vote, their opinions matter, and so I think a success lesson is to include them in discussions around town projects and planning. They are pretty active here. Truro. So this is a hard part of the residential exemption. It's hard to quantify. It's hard to measure if it's working, and this is my task this year at my classification hearing to try and answer these questions. On one hand, I could say, yes, our year-round population is increasing, but was it COVID or residential tax exemption? Most likely COVID people fleeing the city What if I'm going to hang my hat on that, my classification hearing, is our values are increasing 25% FY '23. Who was it buying the houses? Mostly out-of-towners. So they're driving the prices up for local families to purchase a home here. So will $1,000 help someone buy a home? Maybe, maybe not. Or remain in a home? It definitely could help. It may help someone support local businesses rather than Amazon. Last town, Provincetown. I think that there are more people here for now with the exemption. However, the exemption certainly hasn't slowed down the sale of properties with the residential tax exemption. Also, will these COVID refugees, a phrase I stole from Nancy from Wellfleet, still be here in 3 or 5 years? The exemption is new. It's shiny object. We'll see how long the effects last. Now back to the residential exemption. Here in Chatham, there is a break-even point, as I mentioned. A neutral assessment, which is the point where assessed valuation less the exemption results in the residential taxpayer paying more than if the exclusion was not voted. So for FY '23, that point is $2,873.91. There's 139 properties with a Chatham zip code above that. Residential exemption examples for FY '23 estimated tax bill, if it's 20% exemption and you're $1 million property, there'll be a $704.69 savings. If you're a $750,000 property, there'll be a difference of $797.19. If you're a $500,000 property, there'd be a reduction of $889.69. Now, these values will fluctuate depending on the value of your property, even though the residential exemption is a flat figure for all properties. So for FY '23 classification options and Board of Assessors recommendations, at its meeting of August 25th, 2022, the Board of Assessors voted unanimously to make the following recommendations to the Select Board for the fiscal year 2023 classification hearing. On the matter of classifying the tax rate, to vote a residential factor of 1, so that each class maintains 100% of its full value tax share and not shift the tax burden from the residential and open space classes to the commercial, industrial, and personal property classes. On the matter of an open space discount, not to grant an open space discount, which would shift the tax burden from the open space property to the residential property class. On the matter of a residential exemption, not to grant a residential exemption, which would shift the tax burden with the residential class from the residents to part-time residents. On the matter of small commercial exemption, not to grant a small business exemption, which would shift the tax burden within the commercial, industrial, and personal property classes from certain small commercial properties to other commercial and industrial properties. Voting in accordance with these recommendations would retain the historical pattern of taxation for Chatham, the Board of Assessors stated. The following is an explanation of various options and reasons for the Board of Assessors' recommendations. Classification. Classifying the tax rate means applying tax rates to different classes of property: residential, open space, industrial, and personal property. According to the procedures and formulas set by state statutes, voting a residential factor of 1 establishes the same tax rate as applied to all classes at a single rate per $1,000 value. The FY '23 single tax rate is estimated to be $3.88. Classification allows the board to allocate a higher percentage of the tax burden to commercial, industrial, and personal property classes by voting a residential factor of 1. Such an action would result in a tax rate lower for the residential and the open space classes and higher than for the commercial, industrial, and personal property. Open space discount. They stated the open space classification is reserved for properties that could otherwise be held to produce income, but instead are preserved in an open and natural condition for the benefit and enjoyment of the public, which does not necessarily imply public access to the property. Chatham currently does not have any properties classified as open space, so it would have no effect if the Select Board would vote an open space discount. The Board of Assessors is of the belief that open space issues are best addressed through the exercise of conservation restrictions or chapter land elections, both of which demonstrate a firm commitment to open space preservation on the part of the property owner and provide for some recapture of forgiven tax dollars. Residential exemption. The residential exemption grants an exemption of 10% up to 35% of the average residential property value for all residential property owners. The residential exemption is granted to year-round residents through an application procedure. The calculation of the new tax rate to recapture the loss levy results in reduced taxes being paid by the residential property owners while shifting the tax burden to part-time residential property owners. This also results in a higher tax rate with the residential class. The Board of Assessors does not recommend granting the residential exemption, as this results in shifting the tax levy share not between the classes, but between the residential class itself. Additionally, personal property tax is assessed to taxpayers whose residence is not Chatham. The personal property tax is based on 2% of the building cost. There is a $10,000 exemption for personal property tax, which requires an assessed value on the building of $500,000 for residential and $1 million or more for residential condos in order to receive a personal property bill. The result being that part-time residents with an assessment higher than these values will pay a personal property tax on the contents of their Chatham homes, which residents do not pay. The part-time resident customarily place fewer demands on municipal services. The Board of Assessors of the opinion that the residential exemption would be inequitable to create the separation strata within the residential class. If the Select Board votes a residential exemption, the town would need time to implement with our software vendor, procure printing services with a new vendor. The assessors will need to verify and input the exemptions for qualified property owners. If the board wishes to adopt a residential exemption for a future tax year, FY 2024, staff recommends that vote occur anytime well before the tax classification hearing. This can occur as early as next week, or it is part of a planning budget process. Planning efforts will need to begin early in the calendar year to give the assessing office time to reach out to property owners, to identify potential recipients, obtain the required documentation, review and present to the Board of Assessors for approval, and most importantly, determine an adequate overlay. It will also allow staff time to reach out to vendors so tax bills issued in the fall of FY '23 would not be in a timely manner, but they would be in a timely manner in FY '24. As noted above, the Select must vote to adopt and not adopt the residential exemption each year prior to at the tax classification hearing. Small commercial exemption. The small commercial exemption is another option for consideration by the Select Board. The result of legislation passed in 1994, this exemption allows the board to exempt up to 10% of the assessed value of commercial properties that are assessed for less than $1 million and are occupied by businesses with less than 10 employees. If adopted, it has the effect of reducing the property taxes on some commercial and shifting the taxes onto other commercial industrial properties. As with the residential exemption, the loss in levy resulting in the decrease in the total valuation of the commercial class is recaptured within the commercial industrial classes by recalculating a new tax rate for those classes. Unlike the residential exemption, however, wherein a fixed dollar amount exemption is applied to all qualifying parcels, the small commercial exemption is based on a percentage of each of the eligible parcels' valuation. The town of Chatham has 202 commercial properties with assessed value of $1 million or less. This exemption would shift the tax burden within the commercial, industrial, and personal properties from small commercial industrial properties to the larger. As Chatham is a small commercial industrial class, the small business exemptions could cause a hardship on some other businesses. The FY '23 evaluation and estimate tax rate. The Finance Department is reporting The fiscal year 2023 tax rate, as I stated prior, is $3.88. This is a 74% drop from FY22 tax rate of $4.62. The increase in the valuation of the town of 20.43% will be offset by a decrease in the tax rate of 19.07%. There are areas which are higher, and there are areas which are lower than the average of 20.43%. This increase is based on, as I stated earlier, real estate market sales from the year 2021. The fiscal year 2023 values were certified by the Department of Revenue on August 24th, 2022. Attached in the packet is the LA4, which indicates the total value by class of parcels in Chatham. And the recap sheet is not included in the packet. That was an error on my part. And the LA5 is included. As required by the Department of Revenue, must be notified of the excess of levy capacity as part of the tax reclassification. Well, right up until we get approved, we had a change today. And that change was due that we made a recap on the adjustment to the overlay. So the new figure, and let me state it to you because in your packet it's stated differently, is $3,986,162.86. So $3,986,162.86. And prior it was $4 million. So the staff recommendations from the Finance Department is respectfully requested that if the board is considering adoption of the residential exemption, that the board defer such action to a future tax year and not implement for FY 2023 tax year. It is respectfully recommended that the Select Board move that the town of Chatham continue to tax all classes at the same rate by adopting a factor of 1, and to reject the residential exemption and the small commercial exemption. Open space, as we stated earlier, does not apply because we do not have any properties that are in that classification. Move to authorize the use of the signature stamp for the tax rate forms, and authorize the financial director to sign for the BOS electronically for all forms necessary. And we thank you for your consideration. Should you have any questions regarding the foregoing, please, and if future days, right now you have me, but in future days you can feel free to reach out to either Alex or myself.
Dale, thank you so much for that. Thanks for the report, the written report that we received in advance, and then you literally went through the entire report with the public this evening, so I think it's, for those that are paying attention or attending or are listening, it's an excellent summary and full of valuable information. We did make a commitment to do a deep dive or a deeper dive than we've done in the past on this issue. This is the 10th time that I've sat in this chair and thought about residential tax exemption, and frankly, never given it a whole lot of thought in terms of what it might do for folks in town, for year-round residents in town. But giving it more thought this year than ever before, and this type of background is extremely helpful. I think that, you know, we'd be not doing our fiduciary duty if we were to recommend this for this next year. We're not. I don't believe we're going to do that. We can't do that. You guys don't have time to pull it off for fiscal year 23, and we totally get it. This is kind of late in the year. We also get that we can also vote for the residential exemption at any time after tonight and/or even after the first of the year if we so desired. So I want to hear from the Select Board, and then I want to hear from the public. This is a public hearing. I think it's a subject that, in the light of the market dynamics that we have ongoing here in the town of Chatham, I think it's a very appropriate topic to really think about and cogitate and ponder and discuss. So I will. I see hands. I see Mr. Nicastro's hand up, and then we'll go around the horn here, and then we'll turf it open to the public. Mr. Nicastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to make any substantive comment at the present time. I'll wait until we hear from the public. I do want to mention, because Dale brought this to my attention this morning, that the chair of the Board of Assessors was planning to be here this evening, but he is unable to do so. So I do appreciate that Dale read the entire report. I also want to just note that we did receive a number of emails from various people. I would ask that they be made part of the record of the hearing for tonight, so I'll defer any comment on the merits until after we hear from the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nacastro. Ms. Davis, anybody?
Yeah, I'll make some comments now, but I also would like that the emails that were received by the town be read into the record tonight, so that the public can know where everybody's coming from. I agree with you about placing on the agenda for future consideration, for fiscal year '24 makes more sense than '23, obviously because of the burden on the staff. But I wholeheartedly do support a tax exemption, and as we've talked about before, there could be some other considerations we haven't put together. But for me, there's not one silver bullet to support year-round sustainability here. And a residential tax exemption is not a solution in its entirety, but it's part of it. And just like all of us are a part of the town, it's been mentioned that the quickest and easiest, most direct way to provide tax relief is through reduced spending at the municipal level, especially non-critical infrastructure. And I agree reducing our tax rate would be great, and we should keep a keen eye on such matters, but what do we give up? The working waterfront, housing, a COA, our school, climate resiliency, our water system. Please let me know which one of those and what the cost benefit would be if we kick those things down the road, kick the can down the road. The so-called, some call the proposal a possible solution chasing a perceived problem that tax relief is not needed, and Chatham already has one of the lowest tax rates. In 2019, the Select Board recognized that there was a demographic imbalance, a disparity of wealth, and shortage of attainable housing. And so we asked, and we created the Chatham 365 Task Force to take a deeper dive into year-round sustainability and to identify the problem and help the town shift its policies and plannings to help preserve the character and the heart of this town. They held community forums and issued their report to us later in the year. And one of the things they talked about was community buoyancy, which is identified as mitigating costs to live here, the totality of the challenges that are in this town. And when they were speaking of some of the things that they were talking about, two of the items came up. One was mitigating sewer hookup costs for year-round working families, having a residential tax exemption, and giving tax breaks for property owners who are offered year-round rentals. I think we were considering that at the last town meeting, and it did not pass, unfortunately. We also, one of the things was to maintain our elementary school. So the cost of living in Chatham, to some, is high, and it's challenging to navigate. And some have to, and some have said, if you can't afford to live here, why not move? And I find that not to be a solution, but I find that to be the problem. So I'd really like us to be working on the residential tax exemption as a matter of a policy for the town of Chatham. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Shell.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this short. Let me start by saying, to be absolutely clear, if there's a residential tax exemption, I will pay higher taxes. So just to put that out on the table. In spite of the fact that I'm a full-time resident, I don't know, I don't think that we should do this tonight. I think we're pretty much agreed that that's the case. And I have to admit that when we get to that point where we have to say yay or nay, I'm not sure where I'm going to come out. The reason is that, number one, first and foremost for me, is that for a certain percentage of the residents of this town, this is meaningful. Pick a number, but as I interpret the information that we've got from the staff, somewhere around 20%, maybe the 18% that's identified in there, 1,300, 1,400 people will have a benefit in their taxes of about $700 or more as the value of their property goes down. I mean, from person to person. That's meaningful. That is very, very meaningful. And in this community that is in so many ways, and we've heard it from so many different people in different ways, wealthy not only in dollars, but also in terms of culture, in terms of community, and so forth. Maintaining that for people who are not doing as well as other people. Not that they're doing badly, but they're just not at the top of the, or even up in the middle of the homeowners. I think that it is worthwhile. We really do need to take that into account. At the top, I appreciate that people don't like to pay higher taxes, and that's a subject that, I mean, it's almost the third rail. But, you know, the difference here, based on the numbers again, is about 37 cents per $1,000 for people who will pay higher taxes. So that means if you have a house that's worth $1 million, your taxes are going to go up by about $1,100. Now, a lot of people go out to dinner in this town, and they spend $80 or $100 a person on a nice dinner. And it only takes about 3 or 4 of those, and you have paid that incremental amount of taxes. So I don't think that's the issue. And I don't also think that the issue is keeping people here or whether they're going to leave or whatever. I think those are arguments that are pretty much make weights. But what I do think is that we need to be thinking about how do we improve the lot of people who are an integral part of the community who are not as fortunate as some of the others, and particularly people who are renting houses, people who live here and live here in very large, expensive, comfortable houses, and people who live here only part of the time. And by the way, it's not only about residential tax exemption, it's about our seniors. I mean, we talk about there are, I think the number is, 3,250 roughly of people who are entitled to the exemption, or we estimate would be entitled to the exemption. The population of Chatham is, I don't know, around 6,500 people, that give or take. So we're not only talking, there are other people who don't own houses here that I think we have to take into account as well. So for me, this is a very, very tough thing. It is a very, I shouldn't say very, it is somewhat blunt instrument to accomplish, I think, a very, very worthy objective. And the question for me is whether between the administrative difficulties and messiness and expense, as well as some inequities about it, it is still worthwhile to accomplish what I think is a very reasonable objective.
Thank you, Mr. Shell. Mr. Metters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I think we just kind of set the tone last week, and we appear to be all on the same page about not implementing it for the FY 2023 tax year. But clearly, we've done a deeper dive into this topic more recently. You know, I expressed concerns last week that we just frankly don't have the staffing right now in place. We have our budget summit coming up shortly, so we can kind of plug that into the discussions, but what we're going to need if we're going to push this forward for staffing and infrastructure and you name it. You know, understand this, because it's been said this will be another tool in our toolbox. It's going to take more than this one tool. We're going to need a lot of tools to reach the goals that we're setting forth. And let's be blunt about this. This is not the silver bullet that's going to solve everything if it goes through. But it could, if structured properly, be an important component to hit some of these goals. So obviously, I don't believe we're going to act on it tonight. I'm fine with having further discussion on it shortly after tonight, factoring what we're going to need for staffing, what we're going to need to implement this, pursue it, if any changes need to be made, and what other things we need to consider in addition to this to implement to reach the goals that we're setting forth. So that's my 2 cents for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. And now I'll open it up to the public. Please identify yourself and come forward to the microphone and press the button so it goes green. So we'll hear from folks here and then also online. Please identify yourself.
Yes, indeed. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Young. I am a full-time resident of Chatham. And I did drive down Kroll Road today to go vote, and on the high school or the middle school sign, it said, "Better Together." And And then I heard the commentary on the waterways, and obviously I do believe that we're all in the water situation together. But I demonstrably believe that the residential exemption is not about being together. And my words here tonight are to oppose any consideration of the residential exemption. It looks like it's off the table for fiscal '23, but even for '24 and going forward. And the reason I say that, and it's not about, the reason is in summary fashion, because one, I think it's complex, as we've just heard. I think it's extremely divisive. I think we know that non-resident owners in Chatham who do fund the majority of the tax bill here are not going to be in favor of it. But it's also unfair for reasons that you might not consider, and that's why I wanted to speak, which are, consider if you're a renter in Chatham. What if you're a fisherman and you're a renter and you get no benefit at all? So you're lowering the costs of an owner, but you're not lowering the cost for a resident renter. That person may be upset with that. It's a consideration. But even beyond that, in much more macro sense, there's not a single Chatham homeowner who has not made over $100,000 in appreciated value in their home price in the last year. Not a single one. And over the last 2 or 3 years, people have made $200,000 to $300,000 in homeowner appreciation over the last several years. So essentially, conceptually, you're giving a tax break to people who have just had this windfall of $300,000 because they owned a house in Chatham, and you're trying to give them an additional, $1,000 a year. It's actually less, but let's round it, call it $1,000 a year benefit. They've just made $200,000. That's 200 years of benefit. Simple math. And that strikes me as completely unfair. The other reason, and I really want you to consider this as well, and I've studied it at length, is that unfortunately, despite the good intentions, the benefit of that lower personal property tax will be eaten away in the market instantly. The market will discount it immediately, and that house that was valued at $820,000, because you lower the property tax on it by $1,000, the next year it's going to be at $870,000. So you're giving more windfall to the people who you're trying to exempt because they own the house and they just made an extra $70,000 because the house value went up because of the lower cost. Well, I think I articulate well, but I think the idea is to try and, again, you were saying, maintain the population that is maybe more fiscally challenged to meet their expenses, and yet you're just going to continue to price them away because you're going to drive up lower valued homes, relatively speaking in Chatham, lower valued homes. But the most upward price pressure is going to be on the homes between $400,000 and $800,000. If you lower the cost of anything, the price is going to go up. And it's guaranteed that that's going to happen. So I think it's a very important concept and framework to consider as you debate and move forward with your thoughts and deliberations. So
Thank you, Mr. Young.
Yes, thank you.
Well spoke, well said. Mr. Holmgren in the back?
Good evening, John Holmgren, long time no see. Back again, and obviously, I'm maybe sort of the unusual guy here because obviously, yes, I'm a part-time resident, but I also own and operate a second-generation cottage colony, so I provide basically the low-income summer housing for people. My rates are probably the cheapest in town. And so for me, I don't prepare much. You see, this is my total preparation here. I looked at the bracket you had and so on and realized that potentially that my taxes, if this was implemented, might go up by essentially $500 a year. That doesn't seem like that much. In my budgeting system, that's a fair amount. For instance, just when you increase the local option short-term rental tax by 2%, from my point of view, that means I cannot raise my rates for another year. because I can't do that to my customers. But the things, when I went through the information in your packet, the thing that I was surprised to not see was, what is the percentage essentially of the total budget that would be, involved in this shift? And what's the dollar amount? How much money is going to be going from sort of the residents to the non-residents? And then there was no examples in there as to what that would do to, there were some examples of how it would lower the residents' rates, but there was no essentially examples from the other side, how much it would raise the non-residents. So that was something I think you should include in the future. And then obviously, right now, presently, I believe it's around 62% of the total taxes are paid by non-residents. What would that number change to? And then obviously there's also, what's the cost of the, personnel and software and everything else to support this? Those are things I think that need to be added in there. So that was just some of those numbers that I didn't see in terms of, if you will, to get a complete picture of what this might do. So obviously, I'm not really in favor of it, and it's not. I have nothing against, obviously, I want to support, people who stay here all year round. One of my neighbors is, feels like he's being priced out. I want, but I'm not sure if this is necessarily the best way to do it. So.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. And just to respond briefly, you'd have to make some real gross assumptions to calculate the delta between residents and non-residents in total. So there's some large assumptions you have to make in order to calculate. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Select Committee, my name is Bob Potter. I live on Stage Harbor Road. I'm a full-time resident. I've been a full-time resident for 2 years. I've been a seasonal resident for 20 years. I changed my voting status to Chatham 10 years ago, but this is the first time I've been in a meeting like this. I am very opposed to this in 2024, 2025, and beyond. Mr. Young was very eloquent the way he described the situation. My situation is that we remodeled our house about 3 or 4 years ago, so we're right at that level that we talked about. And I use local contractor. We use local people to make our place beautiful. I've retired here. I think it's terribly unfair to seasonal residents to pay a surcharge. And when I went to the town meeting in Veterans Field and I listened to all of the priorities that this town has, the top priority is affordable housing and maybe the water situation as well. But affordable housing is really the issue to get people to come to this town and live here. We have one of the lowest property tax rates in the state. And I don't think people move out of Chatham because of their property taxes. I think they move out of Chatham because it's very, very expensive to live here. So my recommendation would be, let's focus on the core problem, which is affordable housing. Let's tackle that. And I appreciate you listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Ms. Timpson.
Sorry, I need glasses now. Actually, it's better. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I am speaking because I'm representing many people that I have talked to. I hate to drag this on longer, but we are all opposed to the tax exemption whenever, and I suspect that it's still on the books. It's still, you're all thinking about it. Not for 223, but maybe the next year. So that's why I'm bothering to speak. And all of us are opposed to it for the following reasons. One, it represents taxation without representation, increasing the real estate tax on non-residents to pay a discount to every single year-round resident with property assessed for less than $2.8 million. Instead of singling out those who really need financial help to remain in Chatham, this tax represents a massive redistribution of wealth. Many with investments, unearned income, several properties will receive tax relief when they do not really need it. Number two, anyone wishing to apply for a tax exemption would be required by state of Mass statute to supply to the assessor's office yearly full copies of their federal and state tax returns as evidence of primary residence. This is an invasive and an unnecessary demand for private, confidential, personal information. The assessor's office has already requested from part-time residents itemized lists of personal property in their homes with resale values included, and reaped considerable revenues as a result of this new taxation. Number three, the yearly filing of applications for exemption would require an additional employee to work at the assessor's office. A secure vault or file system would be essential to protect private personal information. And where would that vault be located? How much would it cost to construct? Who would have access to the information? How long would it take in a small town like Chatham for private income information to leak out? To be sure, that information would be used to assess trends in personal income. Would it be available to committee heads? Would it be available to select board members, town manager, and other employees? Would it be secure on a town online filing system? These are very serious concerns for many citizens. 4, the most cost of investigating all the real estate trusts in Chatham, irrevocable and other, will be time-consuming, invasive, and in many cases unproductive. Trusts with only non-resident beneficiaries and a family member still living in Chatham will not benefit from the exemption. Only trusts with actual residents named as beneficiaries. Many seniors trying to stay in their homes will not be able to apply. Every year the tax rate will fluctuate, and of course our assessments will change often and almost always increase. Those that are assessed close to the breaking point may not want to go through the invasive process of application. Many residents whom I have talked with will not apply due to the annual tax return requirement. It is crystal clear that this tax does not achieve the goals that have been presented. Instead, it is a broad redistribution of monies as opposed to what we really need, a way of identifying by income rather than by assessed real estate values, who is in dire need of tax relief, who is on the verge of losing their home and residency in Chatham. According to our Director of Assessing, who has conferenced with other Cape towns who have implemented the tax exemption, the process has not really brought in or kept young families. And it is the cost of housing, which has been said before, that is what prohibits the entrance of young families. Finally, because of the significant disparity of assessed valuations in this town, should this decision be determined by 5 people, and I say this very respectfully, but in future, is there a possibility that this would be good for a town meeting vote? I hope you will carefully consider voting against a tax that fails to achieve your goals and has so many unintended consequences. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ann. Mr. Bystrom.
Good evening. My name is Bill Bystrom, and I'd like to thank the Board of Selectmen for all the hours you spend working on these countless town things that come up day after day throughout the year. I think probably if I was still teaching, I'd say this is a good time for everybody to get up and take a stretch, because you've been sitting for a while. But very basically, the reason I'm here tonight is I started thinking about this, and I came up with a lot more questions than I had answers. And back in 2019, the Board of Selectmen appointed a 365 task force to look at the problem that we had maintaining younger people here in Chatham. And they appointed me as one of the members of the committee. I was sort of like the elderly representative to that group. And what I think was very interesting is that on the final report, after 2 or 3 community forums, 18 or 19 meetings that we had, we went hours and hours, the town on September 30th, 2019, was presented a report by the task force. And basically, one of the recommendations of the task force was to embrace the concept of residential tax exemptions. And the reason they did so was threefold. And if you want to read that report, it's in the town records. You can go online, you can find it. And basically, quickly, I'm just going to paraphrase it. The reason it said, one reason was that the committee felt it would benefit low-income residents, year-round low-income residents. Number 2, very possibly it would discourage second home ownership, especially people buying homes to flip or to rent. And thirdly, the impact that the valuation of second homes has upon the state reimbursement for education. When you have a lot of high-value second homes, it bumps up the value of the community. And seeing the value of the community is what the state education department bases their reimbursement on. The more your community is valued, then the less you get in reimbursement. So those things, I think, need to certainly be updated. Those should be looked at. And very quickly, I'll tell you some of the information we use to come up with that. One was, at that time, 17% of the households in Chatham were below the poverty level. Over 50% of the students that attended Chatham Elementary School qualified for free lunches. And of the female-headed households in Chatham, the people below the poverty level range from 5% to 11%, depending on the age group. I think we should certainly take a deep dive, look and see what has happened. Are those statistics stable? Have they changed? Whatever. The other question I have relating to this is I think the Assessors Department did a very nice job, and I certainly think you shouldn't have to change everything this year. That's obvious. There's no time to do that. But one of the things that was mentioned was there are 1,361 households that are valued under $1 million. I would be interested to see how many of those are owned by year-round residents and how many of those are owned by second home residents.
That they were all,
And if we have an answer, sure, absolutely.
they were all.
That figure was based on who has Chatham, Chatham residences for their mailing address. So that figure was already took into consideration. That's the only figure we could derive, was to take it from a mailing address that was of Chatham. So that's where that figure came from.
So we're assuming that 1,361 households that are valued under $1 million, they're all owned by Chatham residents?
We don't know if they're owned. All I can tell you, the only figure I can pull, is that they have a mailing address of Chatham.
Right. I would think, and I don't know if it's possible, that it would be good to find out how many of those are full-time residents of Chatham and how many homeowners, if you can possibly do that.
Yeah, I
don't know
don't
if you
think,
can.
yeah, I don't know if we can. That's
Yeah.
what was stated in the other towns. It's a really hard number to wrap around.
Right,
So-
I agree. I think it
Yep.
would be a good thing if we could, and if you can't, you can't, obviously, yeah. Well, anyway, I just want to thank you very much for taking your time and thinking about this, because it's certainly a question that you need to deliberate on. And again, thank you, and I don't know how you do it week after week and stay up this late by 7:15. A lot of times I'm already nodding off. Have a good night.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mr. Byström. Any others here in public? Any others here in the public here? Yes, Mr. Bean.
Bruce Bean, a 22-year resident, and I think I started as a summer kid here in about 1950. As everyone has pointed out, this is not going to solve our problem. But anything that will make a house more valuable to a potential resident than to a potential bed and breakfast, not bed and breakfast, B&B, no, day-by-day rental, has got to help bring and keep some families into this town. I would hate for this town to all look to be my age. If you don't come up with some reason that I haven't heard yet tonight, I really hope that next year this thing goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bean. Anybody else here this evening in the public forum here physically? How about online? Anybody online would like to speak? I see no hands up, at least that I can see online. So I'll turf it back to the select board and, I'm sorry. Peter, Mr. Kokolas. Mr. Kokolas.
Yeah, Peter Kokolas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, it took me a couple of minutes. You know, the Board of Assessors has provided that kind of information over the years, and I applaud you for getting into it a little bit more deeply than you had before. There were a number of comments that were made that I agree with, especially with things that Mike said, but I also agree with Shireen and Corey. This always has been a difficult one for me, had been a difficult one for me, and it still is. There are a couple of things that were brought up, but I'd just like to summarize just a couple of points. And this is general, you know, I can see, there's no doubt that a residential tax exemption will lower the taxes of those residents falling below, you know, the tax break, the $2 million. I've always had a problem with trying to grasp, is it really going to help the people that really need it? You know, if everybody wants a tax break, and I get it, but just to bring up just a couple of points, you know, it was mentioned the non-residents pay a property tax. And last year, if I remember correctly, that number came to something over $300,000, so even a little bit greater than that, and what the town received as revenue. You know, when I did a little research into the reason for the development of this law back a number of years ago, it was based on the fact that you had a large number of non-resident owners of homes, and that number looked at somewhere between 70 and 75%, and the rest, the 25 to 30%, were long-term residents. And if you look at that, you can see easily that would drive a smaller group, a number of people to be overcome by summer residents. And Chatham is more like 65 and 45. You look at Truro, you look at Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard, and a couple of others. They're up in the 70 to 80% range, especially. You know, and yeah, we have a low tax rate, and where our tax burden is about in the middle for all the people. You know, historically, 40% of our second homeowners have become residents, and that was reinforced this past year through the Cape Cod Commission, who used about that same number of people that become residents. So we have summer residents that are filling a whole range of housing the range of housing, the price of specific housing. And it's hard to tell where in that mix the tax benefit will really help, because for a number of people, it's going to be a tax bonanza. Who may have a home that's worth $700,000 or $800,000 or whatever. So I have a tough time with this. But having said that, I agree that there are people that are struggling here. And yes, it came out of 365. There are really a lot of people that are struggling. Are they all housing owners? Are they having a problem to live? This may not help. I think you should take a deep dive in getting into it, but I have serious concerns that it's really not going to help all those people enough. And what we're going to do is create a complex tax problem that also includes an issue that was mentioned by others on trusts, and those trusts will have to be looked at. So somebody's going to have to look at it in the town, and obviously it's going to take more resources to do that. If I knew exactly where the numbers were, and all of you, where our problems were, I'd save the money. I wouldn't hire anybody else. I'd put the money directly into helping the people that are most struggling, and that's where we need to go. It may be a larger number than we all think about, but I agree. How many of our students were on food assistance? That doesn't say they're all homeowners, but that doesn't say they aren't. So I applaud you for doing this. I think that you should look carefully at it. I think you should look carefully at all the issues that are involved. What is the purpose of this? Is it to give everyone a tax break who's a resident, to help them? Well, that's one thing. If it's to address an issue that has to do with the most needy or those that are struggling, then that's what you should be focusing on. And not use as somebody said, a blunt instrument to try and fix the problem. But having said that, it's a tough decision. But I think you'll do the right thing in the long run. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. I see hands up. Carolyn, I think Carolyn McClellan. Carolyn?
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
KM? Yep.
Yep. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate for taking my hand. I couldn't get it up fast enough when you asked before. I just had a couple of comments. I wanted to respond to some of the points that some of the speakers have brought up in regards to this. I'm in favor of it. And I think when we talk about the impact that our seasonal economy has had on the typical everyday Chatham resident, the year-round resident, I think most of the locals are overwhelmed by the impact of whether it be rising housing prices or the water shortage, or just the growth in the town. These traffic, all these issues, they all come from the surge in our population during the season time, and it's part of our economy and everything. But for some of the locals, they're getting it's not beneficial. They're getting squeezed out, so they're not benefiting from the upside of that experience. They're just being squeezed out and they're suffering. There is a lot of poverty in this town, and a lot of people are suffering. So this would be a great way to get some revenue for those folks. One of the speakers mentioned that everybody's just experienced a huge windfall with their property values going up by $100,000 to $300,000 in the past number of years. And although that's true, that's only at advantage if you liquidate your property. For most of us who plan on living here, it just means our taxes are going to go up. So the impact of all of these.
It's not going to mean your taxes are going to go up.
Someone's got to mute themselves, please. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Okay, thank you. And then one of the other comments were mentioned was that the Chatham has one of the lowest tax rates. Why should we lower them even more for some folks? Well, I would think that might be the argument, that we could possibly raise them a little for some folks, because Chatham is one of the lowest in the whole state. I think we're 4th or 5th after mostly towns in Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard, if I'm correct. So we still have an incredibly low tax rate, even if you factor in the increase that some of these homeowners at the higher end of property owners might suffer. So I don't think it's going to be that horribly impactful for those folks. I also would like to echo some of the comments that Bill Bykster made in terms of the impact that, and the message from 365 and all the work they did. They certainly did a thorough research on understanding where the town is. And, some of these things are really hard to measure. As you mentioned, from other communities having trouble nailing down exact figures on things. But the 365 really did a really deep dive onto what's happening now in our town with our community. And I think we should really listen to the comments they had. And then lastly, just on one of the comments just recently made about it's a complex problem. We might be just making the tax code really complex. Well, other towns have found a way to do this. It's not an impossible problem to solve. It might be complex, but where there's enough intelligent people in town to figure out how to do this. I really don't like the out when we say it's just too hard to do, so we can't do it. We need to be forward thinking. We need to be proactive in solving the problems for our community. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. I see Rick Levitt's hand is up. Rick?
Thank you, Jeff. I agree with Peter's comment earlier tonight, or just a moment ago. I think we all understand the biggest cost to live in Chatham is housing. A $700 tax benefit won't help. The best way to help our year-round residents, our year-round citizens, is provide housing that they can afford. As was previously said quite eloquently just a little earlier tonight, let's focus on the core problem of getting affordable housing. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. I see David Wickham, I believe. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. One of the most important things you do as a select board each year is to set this classification on the tax rate. I don't think many people up until the last couple of months even understood that this was something that the Board of Selectmen could do by a majority, and it can be done unchanged each year. You do it every year. So if you were to institute this year, you could uninstitute it next year. So I think there's been a lot of comments tonight. I think the deep dive that you talk about needs to be done. So I just want to encourage you to take the recommendation of the staff and put this on the agenda for the next year, the 2024 fiscal year. During your budget process, make arrangements for this to be done, and then let the community talk about it more in the next year, and get going shortly after January and take a vote on this. So I think it's, affordable housing certainly is number one. There's no doubt about that. But once some of these families are able to afford the house, staying in Chatham and affording to live in Chatham, this would certainly help. So I think it certainly deserves more airtime, and I hope you'll continue to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitcomb. Anybody else online? I see no hands up. I will now turf it back to the board, and I see Mr. Nacastro's hand is up. Mr. Nacastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Several comments. First of all, I agree with Mr. Levitt and Mr. Kokolas that the real solution to the problem of making it possible for people to live in this town is with affordable and attainable housing. And this board has undertaken a number of initiatives. We have 3 parcels that we have a handle on right now, all of which are in play for the construction of housing. Mr. Whitcomb just referred to making a deep dive. I think we've done a deep dive this cycle. We had this memo that was read tonight and this memo that was read last week, or referred to last week, from the assessing department. The residential tax exemption constitutes a major revision to the town's real estate tax system. And I think that in order to justify implementing it, the burden should be on those who support it to provide data to show that it's going to work. that is going to somehow alleviate the difficulty of living in this town that faces a lot of people. We saw from the information that was provided from the towns of Nantucket, Truro, Wellfleet, and Provincetown, and I'm more interested in Wellfleet because that's the only one that has a mix of seasonal versus non-seasonal that is remotely approximate to Chatham, but there's no data to support that the residential tax exemption helps keep people in town or attracts people into town. I look upon it as a transfer payment. Ms. Timpson referred to it as a redistribution of wealth. It probably is that too. I don't think you use the real estate tax system to accomplish that. That's a social goal. I think we should listen to the Board of Assessors. They work in this area every day, and they are adamantly against this. I've been on this board 7+ years. Mr. Chairman, I have voted against this 7 times. This is going to be my 8th time. I have another year after this, next year, and it'll be 9, presumably, because I don't think I would ever support this. I did support the petition filed by Mr. Taylor that went to town meeting last year because that petition was tied to a specific tool that could benefit housing. And I thought it deserved, and I still think it deserved, a hearing up on Beacon Hill, and that's what he was asking for. Reference has been made to Chatham 365. I wasn't part of that process. I was chair of the Board of the Selectmen at the time. I remember having a conversation with Mr. Kokolas about this particular recommendation, and I could stand to be corrected. I didn't think the recommendation, I don't want to pick nits here, but I didn't think the recommendation was to implement it, but was to study it. I can be corrected by my colleague to my left. She was on that board as well as Mr. Kokolas on that committee. The data that was provided tonight by the Director of Assessing showed that approximately 30% of the parcels in town, of the residential parcels, are under $1 million. But the break-even point is $2.6 million. So any parcel in town, if you're a resident of the town year-round, you will qualify potentially for this exemption if your house is valued up to $2.6 million. But not everybody who lives in town year-round is going to qualify. There will be people who will be disqualified because their property is in trust, and we have 575 parcels that are in trust. And those people paid attorneys to draft those trusts. Is the town of Chatham going to, if we adopt this, going to reimburse these people the cost of hiring an attorney to revise their trusts? Many of these people are seniors, are elderly people. Some of them, their main asset is their house. They may be cash poor. The legislature has misnamed this feature. It's not a residential tax exemption because some residents are going to be disserved by it. We heard a lot of argument in favor of it, in opposition to it from the summer residents. We've heard that, frankly, perennially. And a lot of it makes a lot of sense. It's extremely divisive. I think I want to just close by reading from a portion of an email we received from Mr. Stephen Daniel in his private capacity as a citizen. He happens to be the chair of the Finance Committee. And let me say that I speak not just as a member of this board, but I think I'm Mr. Average, because the average assessment in this town, according to the assessing department, is $1.2 million approximately. That's what the assessing department has valued my house. They've multiplied my assessment 6 times since I bought it. I've been in this town 30 years. And I've lived with the current tax system. And now we're contemplating changing it, whether tonight or in the future. I think that's a disservice. This is what Mr. Daniel said, in part. The enactment of a residential tax exemption would seem to be blatantly inconsistent with the votes of 2 regular town meetings in the past 16 months, in which voters twice rejected the idea of a residential tax exemption. Tangentially, in each of the last 2 years, the Finance Committee has voted unanimously against the proposed residential tax exemption articles. The committee expressed concern that a potential tax exemption would be arbitrary, inequitable, divisive, and of questionable economic and social benefit. Given its revenue neutrality, the residential tax exemption is a social policy tool, of course, and not a fiscal policy. Any such policy would ultimately choose winners and losers amongst all homeowners in town, including amongst all full-time residents. Given the feedback provided to town staff by employees of towns which have enacted the residential tax exemption, it's not remotely clear what benefit, if any, clearly results from a residential tax exemption. I'll just close by saying that I appreciate that you want to bring this forward for 2024 for consideration. We have to vote in 2024 anyway. If you want to take more information, get more information from the public, that's fine. But I have yet to be convinced by anybody that this is good for this town. I've seen no data to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeCastro. Ms. Davis?
So I just do want to address what you had thrown at me about the 365 recommendation. And I did take the language from the report verbatim, which said community which was, let's see, mitigate, they had listed in their community buoyancy, mitigate sewer hookup costs for year-round working families, have a residential tax exemption. So it was recommended by them not to do a deep dive, but to actually do that. So there's a couple of things. I mean, Massachusetts has this law in the books for a reason, right? I mean, it's there. It's there for us to take this option. This is not an anomaly. I mean, this isn't like, oh my gosh, we're the only ones doing it. There's towns all over the Cape that have done this, and Boston, and I want to just reiterate that when we've looked at community sustainability, which this board has kept as a goal over the last, well, since 2019, a goals of an objective is that we know that there's not one complete answer to our problems here in Chatham. And so having something like this on the table and being able to discuss it and to have it happen is part of a bigger solution that we need to really be moving forward with. If we're going to keep a quality, year-round, thriving community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Shell?
Yeah, just a couple of follow-ons from me. We were summer residents for 21 to 33 years, more or less, and we've been full-time residents for more or less 10 years. And I over that time, and there are many people who've been here a lot longer as full-time residents, so I don't purport to be an expert here, but the one thing that I have observed is that over time, the community has grown and developed and in a very, very collegial, collaborative way, made itself into a place that a lot of people really like and a lot of people like to come to and a lot of people aspire to retiring to, et cetera. And part of that is I want to take my hat off to the way the town has been managed. I mean, we have this phenomenal tax rate that everybody talks about. We have a great bond rating that everybody talks about. I mean, everything here seems to work pretty well. And I think that's a product of, by and large, we've had our, I say we, there have been some, fisticuffs here and there and arm wrestling back and forth now and then and people on one side or another of this, that, or the other issue. But overall, there has been a tremendous amount of success that it, to me, is the product of more collaborative and collegial work than opposition. People talk about this being divisive. Yes, when somebody has to pay taxes and somebody else gets a benefit, I suppose that's divisive. But, you know, with all due respect to my good friend, Mr. Nacastro, in some sense, all taxation is social policy. All financial policy is social policy. You take in money and you spend money in order to accomplish objectives that are for the benefit of the community. At least that's what we try to do. I guess I'll close by saying that, you know, in his usual fashion, Mr. Levitt said it very clearly. He said, we have to do something about affordable housing. That's absolutely true. And by the way, we're going to have to spend some money to do that. But that is not mutually exclusive from this issue. The fact that we need to deal with affordable housing doesn't mean this issue can't be dealt with on its merits. And I think on its merits, there is absolutely no question that people who are opposed to it have some very, very good arguments. It isn't perfect, but the people who are in favor of it have some very, very good arguments as well. And it does do something that is positive. Maybe it doesn't do it perfectly, maybe it doesn't do it quite as precisely as we would like, but it does have a positive effect. And I think what we have to work out in our discussions going forward, whenever we take this up for fiscal '24, is how do we, as best we can, fit those imperfections together in a collegial and collaborative way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shell. Mr. Metters.
Just closing comment, I'd like to thank everyone for their comments tonight. I think it's very beneficial that we get public input. This is the back and forth type of element I kind of like, you know. We're going to talk about our later agenda later, but that's it. But I like this back and forth, people giving us input, emails coming in, we're having a conversation as a community. Clearly, we're not going to act on this tonight, but we're going to have a hearty conversation moving forward in the short term. It's very clear, and I do appreciate everyone's input on both sides of the topic.
Thank you, Corey. Yeah, and my summary comments are, I'm certainly very interested in its further pursuit. I think there are excellent arguments on both sides of the issue here. However, when we talk about affordable housing and our desire to have a sustainable community, in my heart of hearts, I kind of feel as though the last year or so, we've kind of reached a tipping point here in Chatham where the local folks are really getting priced out of a lot of stuff here. And they need some relief. Now, I don't have data to back that up, but I do have anecdote, and we've heard anecdote from assessors' offices across the Commonwealth here in the Cape about whether or not the residential tax exemption is a viable tool and whether it keeps young folks here or attracts young folks. I don't think young families are going to come here to Chatham because we offer a residential tax exemption. But as I said before, it's another arrow in the quill to provide relief for those that are less fortunate here in town. And at times, we're blind to those folks. Well, you know, I'm not so blind anymore. I think they need some relief. And affordable housing is certainly one gigantic need that I think will go a long way to sustain a more diverse community, and we're working very hard on that. But I think a focused look at this residential tax exemption, which we've already done a lot of work, I hope we do more, is another tool in the toolbox, number one. Number two, it is more of a cudgel than it is a surgical incision. I agree with that point being made. It's broad-based, may not necessarily be fair to all, but it is a tool that is available to us to, if we vote a majority, to use here in the town to try to get a more egalitarian tax system, especially for those that have lower income. And I guess lower income is a proxy for less assessed value as a home, in a home, too. I'm using that as a proxy. But I do think we have to do more homework, and I think the appropriate time to do that is during our budget deliberations, which we do deeply under the leadership of Jill and Alex, and we have many budget deliberations. And I will commit to keep this on the agenda in the course of those deliberations. Any other negative voices notwithstanding, as chair, I will keep it on the agenda. going forward. We certainly will not enact it for 23. We'll have a motion here shortly, I hope, by someone. It's not fair to anybody to do it for 23, but we're going to keep it in the forefront for 24. And also, never mind the residential tax exemption. Keep in the forefront other creative ideas where we can perhaps assist with more surgical precision to those that perhaps have less income here in town versus what otherwise, frankly, is an extremely affluent and very well-off town. So those are my summary comments, and I will certainly entertain a motion this evening by one of us. Motion, please.
Corey. Mr. Chair, first I move that we respectfully not implement a residential tax exemption for the FY 2023 tax year. Further, that I move that the town of Chatham continue to tax all classes at the same tax rate by adopting a factor of 1, and to reject the residential exemption and the small commercial exemption. And secondly, or lastly, move to authorize use of the signature stamp for tax rate forms and authorize the finance director to sign for the Board of Selectmen, actually should be the Select Board, electronically for all forms necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. And a second? Thank you, Mr. Nacastro. Okay, Mr. Metters, what say you?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro?
Aye.
And the chair certainly says aye as well. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the folks that weighed in this evening. I would just like to thank the folks that weighed in this evening, that spent the time to come here and voice your concerns and your opinions. Very much appreciated. I echo Corey's sentiments. This is one of the best, this is the best way we get good feedback. So folks that were here, present physically, thank you very much. Folks that weighed in online, thank you very much as well. Again, it's time spent on the behalf of interested citizens in investments in their time in their town. So it's very much appreciated. Mr. Nacastro.
Mr. Chairman, when you bring this back for consideration in 2024, I would like to ask that you include on the agenda a proposal to send a warrant, place a warrant article for the annual town meeting 2023 for its advice on this subject. I understand it's not binding.
We'll take it under advisement.
Thank you.
Under further consideration for the Select Board. Thank you, Mr. Nacastro. Okay, thus ends our public hearing. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. On to our regular business agenda. If I can find it here. Here it is. We do have an opportunity for the public to weigh in on our business agenda. We have an appointment to the Barnstable County Home Consortium. We have the acceptance of a donation at Taylor's Pond. Perhaps most importantly, we have an update on waterfront bond projects update, and then we have a committee appointment to the Cultural Council. Please leave quietly. Please leave quietly. Please. Okay, off to the board. I see no one with their hand raised, nor anybody with their hand raised here to weigh in on our business agenda. The first item is appointment to Barnstable County Home Consortium to fill the vacancy of Ali Sabatino. I believe Gloria McPherson is going to be nominated. Jill, off to Jill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ali Sabatino was our principal planner who also managed our housing programs. She was representative to the home program, and since she has departed, we were left for another position. We were asking that we appoint Gloria McPherson as Chatham's representative to the home consortium until August 15th, 2025.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the board appoint Housing and Sustainability Director Gloria McPherson as the Chatham representative to the Home Consortium until August 25, 2025.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Nacastro, what say you?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Mr. Metters?
Aye.
Chair says aye as well. Next item on the agenda is a donation acceptance of a bench at Taylor's Pond. Ted Keon is here this evening. It's kind of a standard request. It's a beautiful-looking bench. Ted, would you like to say anything about the granite bench at Taylor's Pond? I believe Mr. Chevry is here.
Yeah, it's a request from Mr. Chevry, very straightforward. It's, I think, a very suitable site. Conservation agent has approved the location from her jurisdiction, so Rich can present what he wants to talk about.
Please, Mr. Chevry.
Good evening. I am requesting permission to donate a memorial granite bench in memory of my uncle Thomas Chevry. He passed away in February 2022 and lived in Chatham for over 35 years. The location would be at Taylor's Pond. Currently, there's no bench, and I think it would be a great location for people to enjoy it.
Great, that's super. Will it be inscribed?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, good. All right, Mr. Matters.
I think this is a very nice gesture. I think it would be a nice little addition to the area. It's an area that I grew up in back when you could actually launch boats out of that ramp, but no longer. It's canoes, kayaks, stuff like that. And seeing the picture in the very back, very random memory I have as a kid. There was a neighborhood goose that was in that area, and it passed away, and someone put a memorial, a little white cross. Is it George Honker? And it was, and I have no idea what happened to the crucifix, the cross. It probably disappeared over time, whatever. But there was a goose that was buried there, and had a little. Here lies George. And I just remember as a kid seeing this thing. So I think the bench is a wonderful idea. Fully support it. But it just jogged a memory from my childhood.
Thank you, Mr. Matters. Ms. Davis.
I think it's a beautiful site and a lovely, it's a lovely sentiment to memorialize your uncle there. So I'm going to move to recommend that we approve the donation of the bench for Taylor's Pond.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Matters, what say you?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. DeCastro?
Aye.
The chair certainly says aye.
Thank you
Have
very
fun with it,
much.
it's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, next, waterfront bond projects update, Fish Pier bulkhead replacement project and all projects. Mr. Keon, I see the harbor master, Mr. Smith is here as well, and Mr. Duncanson is online. Mr. Duncanson, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Being respectful of what time it is, and you still have other items on your agenda, hopefully we can move through this fairly quickly. Anyway, as the board is aware, back in 2017 at the annual town meeting, $11.3 million was appropriated in a bond to support a variety of waterfront projects. And in your memo, we've included the same table that was in that article to give an idea of, recognizing that these projects were proposed in 2016. They originally started out as 5-year capital projects, and then the decision was made after consultation with the finance director and the town manager to actually move them over into a separate bond article because there were so many projects over that period of time, and the dollar value was significant at $11.3 million. And those projects included about $5.5 million for various projects at the Fish Pier that are outlined in your memo. They were intended to be done in various fiscal years. But as you can imagine, over time, as various projects get done, they get combined with other projects for cost-saving purposes and also for efficiency purposes. And a number of those have taken place, such as rebuilding the interior columns of the Fish Pier packing building. That was done as part of the Fish Pier observation deck project because we were tearing into the building, so walls were being opened up for that, and so it made sense to go ahead and do the column replacements while the walls were open. We also included the Fish Pier fuel system replacement. There was money appropriated previously for the fuel tank replacements in the upper parking lot. Obviously, as part of the observation deck, we had to do some other issues related to the fuel system. So that also was included in the observation deck project, as well as making them more resilient by raising the dispensers up above what was anticipated to be the normal flood stage and things like that. So over the years, a number of these projects have gotten, I won't say mixed in with other projects, but incorporated into other projects to make them more efficient and get them done more quickly. Right now, we are bringing forward to you the South Jog bulkhead replacement. This project was identified in the 2016 study that looked at the entire Fish Pier facility and identified pretty much everything from soup to nuts that needed to be done there over in accordance with coastal resiliency, in accordance with normal wear and tear, and the longevity of some of these items, such as the bulkhead replacement. As part of the bulkhead replacement project, we're also looking to redo the Wharfinger deck and stairs. because that had also been identified, and there was an expectation that there could be some cost savings by combining those various projects together. And then two other areas that have been incorporated into this project as well are a sidewalk from the upper lot to the lower lot along Barcliff Avenue extension. And as I'm sure many of you have observed, having been down there at various times, especially in the summertime, in spite of staff's best efforts and multiple signs indicating folks not to use the Barcliff Ave extension, basically roadway between the upper and lower lots, they do so on a regular basis, pushing baby strollers and wheelchairs and all kinds of things because they don't want to deal with the stairs at the Wharfinger building. The other issue that we're trying to address as part of this is obviously the fish pier is really a tale of two activities. One is the commercial offloading facility, which involves tractor trailer trucks, box trucks, large pickup trucks and all on a regular basis. And the other is either Chatham's first or maybe second tourist attraction, with large numbers of tourists coming down to visit the fish pier, see the fish operation, see the seals, now see the sharks. So more and more it is turning into a significant tourist attraction. And in the lower parking lot, that creates a lot of issues with pedestrian traffic, especially between, say, the end of the stairs at the Wharfinger building and going over to the South Jog. A lot of people cut through the parking lot where we have all these other activities taking place. And, unfortunately, I suspect it is only a matter of time before we have some incident down there where somebody is injured, and hopefully nothing worse than that. So as the second component or the third component of this project, we have proposed to put a walkway around the west and south sides of the lower parking lot to try to funnel foot traffic, pedestrian traffic, coming down through the stairs or from a new sidewalk that want to go to the South Jog and join one of the charter boats to, take them out to the beach or take them out shark watching or seal watching or whatever, and keep them out of the center part area of the lower lot where we have all this heavy truck traffic. So as indicated in the memo, we've completed a number of projects at the fish pier, most notable of which is the observation deck replacement that was completed a couple of years ago. That was discussed with the board in 2017. And then in 2018, the board approved the project and approved taking the funding for that out of the waterfront bond. And then before you tonight, we have both the South Jog bulkhead replacement and the Wharfinger stair project, like I say, that have been combined. And as part of your memo, you have the reports from Pomeroy Associates as well as Foth Engineers on a review of bids that were recently opened for the bulkhead replacement project. The low bidder came in at $3.6 million. There is a construction phase services for the engineer of about $337,000. Pomeroy Associates just under $220,000 for a full-time RPR and other services during the project. And then we have a construction contingency of 7.5% at $273,000. That is slightly higher than the normal construction contingency. Normally we carry about 10% before bidding, and then once we have bids, we normally drop that contingency down to 5%. However, in conversations with Rick Pomeroy at Pomeroy Associates, given the current climate and the uncertainty over material costs and whatnot, given supply chain issues and everything else, we felt it prudent to carry a 7.5% contingency. Now, keep in mind, the contingency is there if something unforeseen were to happen. This project is a little bit more straightforward because we're not digging foundations, we're not taking out underground tanks or anything like that. So while we're comfortable with the contingency, we're not anticipating having to spend it. We have added another contingency into this project known as a sidewalk contingency. We did, as part of the bidding project, include the sidewalk along Barcliff Avenue extension. However, there were some issues with the design of that could not be rectified in the short time we had to try to get this project out to bid, and still meet our timeline of going to construction, this late fall, so that everything is completed by next fishing season or the beginning of June, say. As a result of that, the bid for the sidewalk from the low bidder, MAS Bridge Construction, which you may remember was the contractor for the Muddy Creek Bridge Restoration Project, their bid for that sidewalk was over $700,000. They indicated that it seemed extremely high based on their take on what a sidewalk along there should cost. However, they did bid it based on what was in the design plans. So we did include it as a bid alternate. However, the bid was structured such that the award for the bid would be made only on the base bid, not including the alternate. So as a result of that, we are able to work with the contractor and the engineer, as well as Pomeroy, and take a second look at that sidewalk design and hopefully come up with a design that will reduce the cost significantly. So we looked at the costs carried by the various other bidders, and we put in a $500,000 contingency for the sidewalk. We don't think it's going to be that much. Hopefully we can work together over the next couple of weeks, month and a half or so, and come up with a redesign of the sidewalk to significantly reduce the cost down, but still provide for the public safety that is absolutely required for this location. So we ended up with a total project cost of roughly $4.9 million, which includes the bulkhead replacement, the Waterfinger building, deck and stairs being rebuilt to bring them into code, and also address some other issues with them, as well as all the various contingencies and the owner's project manager, the owner's representative, and the engineering construction phase services. We have received, as I'm sure the board is aware, we have received a $1 million grant from the Seaport Economic Council for this project, meaning that we have a total project cost of roughly $3.9 million. And we are proposing to take that out of the waterfront bond that was approved back in 2017. And we do have a paragraph in here on fiscal impact. It was prepared in consultation with the finance director, which indicates we currently have about $6.6 million in the waterfront bond. If we fund this project at $3.9 million, we will have roughly $2.6 million left in the waterfront bond for various other projects that were in the pipeline or are in the pipeline and were described in the 2017 bond issue. One thing to keep in mind is that $2.6 million remaining does not include any further grants that the town may obtain or any other potential funding sources, such as the WOOF, which we will discuss in a minute. So bottom line is we are recommending to the board that you endorse the use of the waterfront bond to fund the Fish Pier South Jog bulkhead replacement project in the amount of $3.976 million. So I can stop there and address any questions specific to that, or if you would like, I will continue on with the other waterfront project updates.
Bob, we're going to just take a pause here and just kind of focus on the Fish Pier project. I have one question to preempt the other members of the select board. If we spend the 3.9 on the Fish Pier, we have about 2.7 left, you said, is that? And then what other projects are still remaining? I know Riders Cove is still remaining. And what is
Yes, the other projects that are still remaining, which we are working on, is the shelter building for the trap dock.
Yeah.
We did receive one bid, and this kind of gets into the rest of the update.
Yeah.
We do have the shelter building at the trap dock. We have the bulkhead repair replacement at Riders Cove. We have rebuilding the dock at Little Mill Pond. And then we also had the Crow's Pond ramp, trying to address the fact that that ramp is really only usable at certain tides. That's been a long-standing discussion about, is that ramp adequate, or does there need to be some additional work tried to be done for that? It's complicated by the fact that it is in Crow's Pond, which is an area of no improvement dredging within the Pleasant Bay ACEC. So whether or not we could make the ramp more usable without having the need to dredge is something we'd have to look at significantly.
Thank you, Bob. And
So that's just-
yeah, we have 90 Bridge Street too, I think, which is.
Yes,
the
and we have
upweller
90
building.
Bridge Street, which is currently in the permitting stage. We brought that back to the board on several occasions, gotten your go-ahead to go into final design and permitting. We are in the permitting stage. We have received the order of conditions from the local CONSCOM, and we have submitted paperwork to the Army Corps as well as the state's Chapter 91 program for the further permitting for that project. We're probably still months away from hearing with regard to state and federal permits on that project.
Okay, thank you. My concern is just running out of money for the projects that we want to do. I'll turn it back to the board. Mr. Nacastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 3 or 4 questions. Thank you, Bob, for the presentation. First of all, with respect to the other bids on this project, and I appreciate your bringing this forward. This, I think, is the first time we've received this level of detail on bids on a particular construction project. The third lowest, I think, was AC Marine and General Contracting. Are they the company that did the trap dock?
Yes. Yes,
And
ACK Marine, it's the
They did a
company that
very
did the trap
efficient,
dock.
they did a very efficient job on that. It was extremely well done, and they're showing about $250,000 higher, which is, I know Rick Pomeroy is on this meeting. I don't know if he has
Yes.
any observation on that. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Rick.
Hi, good evening, Rick Pomeroy. Yeah, actually, ACK was the 4th bidder.
Okay.
And the 3 lowest bidders were within margins, very slight margins of one another. And we were very pleased with the results. We would have loved to have seen ACK a little bit more competitive, and I think they realize that too. But we feel very strongly that the 3 low bidders are so close to one another that it really shows some strong competition. All of the bidders were seeing the same things, same items in the documents. There were a lot of questions during the bidding that were answered and issued in addenda. So there was a lot of coverage on this, and we're very pleased. Granted, ACK was about $250,000 higher, a little bit less than maybe 8%.
Yeah, I was just left with the question. You froze up there,
You froze
so.
up, Rick.
Sorry.
That's okay. So I was just left with the question as to whether ACK knows something that the other bidders don't know about this, what it's really going to take to do this project, but I hear what you're saying. The second question has to do with the due diligence around MAS. Now, they're the group, as Bob said, they did the Muddy Creek Bridge, right?
Yes.
Right. So all I can say is that as someone who drives over there and looks at it, it looks like they did a great job, because the cleanup of Muddy Creek was almost immediate, to the point where George Olmsted wanted us to change the name, if you remember, the late George Olmsted, yeah, because it was no longer muddy. But you did check one reference. That was the only one that you could make contact with. And if I'm reading this correctly, this is in one of your charts, it says the projects are, I assume this is the ones these are the projects they had worked on, are not related to anchored steel sheet pile bulkhead installation, which I guess is part of this work. Reference contacted, provided good feedback. So it looks like you got a good reference from one party who had done work that was different from what's involved in this contract. Am I understanding that correctly? And are there other I mean, is it sufficient to just check one reference?
I can offer some clarification on that. Both Foth and Pomeroy conducted reference checks on all of the contractors, and Foth's, I hope I'm coming, I must have a bad connection. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear
We
you.
can hear you now.
Okay. You're seeing Foth's summary report for that they had provided. We had received more references, and as a matter of fact, I spoke directly with Mass DOT and got a copy of their all of their pre-qualification and project reports, very similar to DCAM, and it was quite impressive. And there were a number of projects that that they did have similar experience on. So unfortunately, we were working at such a quick pace that both companies were doing independent reviews. We were able to get more response than Foth was.
I appreciate that.
And I,
Go ahead, Rob.
yeah, and I can add to that, Dean. During the Muddy Creek Bridge project, there was steel sheet piling installed as part of that project. That's the way they were able to build the bridge in two segments on basically two sides while maintaining flow through the creek, was they used steel sheet piling. So they do have experience with it.
Okay, so the plan for this particular project, as distinct from the observation deck, is that we're going to have an owner's project manager in place from the beginning. Is that correct, Jill?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, let me ask a broader question, I guess, of the town manager. I think I one time suggested this asked about this in a private conversation with you, Jill. And with all due respect to Mr. Pomeroy, whose work I greatly respect, we have so many projects here, and, you know, there's one firm involved as project manager. The question occurred to me whether it made sense to have an on-staff clerk of the works employed by the town, whether it would be more cost-effective, or whether we would even be able to hire someone like that. I know that, it's certainly my understanding anyway, that in some of the larger cities, larger municipalities, they may have people on staff that can supervise that. And I'm taking nothing away from Rick, because I think he's, just as he's shown right now in terms of the due diligence, he brings a lot to the table, as he did with the fire station. But do you have any thoughts on that or comment you want to make?
We haven't in the past used clerk of the works that often. A project that probably we could have, and I think it was staff that provides some project management. I mean, the trap dock project wasn't that complicated, but certainly the engineers and you know, the oversight that was required, we did provide. This, I think, is a little more complicated. Hits a trigger for us for an owner's project manager. And in order to get this project going by late fall, as the team is recommending, I'm not sure we could hire someone who could give us the credentials to be able to certify the project, you know, once it's completed and manage it as well.
Well, I appreciate the presentation and the explanation of the funding. It's great that we got the Seaport grant. I think it's an important project. This really is going to help with safety in that area, I believe. Bob, isn't that correct? The whole point of some of this, not all of it, is some of it is to separate the tourists and the visitors from the people that are doing the commercial fishing work.
Yes, absolutely, to try and address that issue that, you know, has been there for years, but frankly, in the last couple of years, it's just getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
You know, the Fish Pier is clearly the town's, you know, if not, you know, Main Street may have more walkers, but the Fish Pier is definitely the second location they go to.
We're very fortunate that we haven't had any claims brought against the town for a personal injury. I don't think we have in that area. So the sooner we can correct the problem, the better. I'm supportive of this. Thank you. Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you, Mr. Nacastro. Ms. Davis?
So I'm supportive of this, and I've seen the South Jog. It's, you know, it's bulging out and it's in disrepair, and we wanted to improve that. I think safety is key for the Fish Pier. I'm just going to keep it brief because it's 8:15. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Any other comments here this evening? Mr. Meadows,
No, I support this. I look forward to working with, you know, I'm the liaison to 3 of the waterway committees, and as we move these projects forward, just, you know, keep communicating with them, the chairs, the board and, try to use this $11 million as best as possible, and, being very optimistic that we're going to do this in the right way and budget-friendly.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. I just have two comments. I'll try to keep it brief. On the north side of the fish pier for pedestrians, how do they get down to the observation deck? Is there a crosswalk? I should know, I'm down there, but is there a crosswalk that's clearly delineated and that's where they walk? So we don't need a sidewalk per se over near the fish pier, restaurant?
Yes, there is a clearly delineated crosswalk that starts at the end of the stairs from the Wharfinger building and goes from there across the parking lot to the new stairs up to the observation deck.
Okay, super, thank you. That answers that question. And then in terms of what the balance is in the $11.4 million, bonding that we did, are we going to need to prioritize the remaining projects? I guess back to the first question I had.
That's a hard question to answer, Dean, because as you know,
Jeff?
Prices change almost daily. The scope of some of these projects, some have gotten bigger, some have actually gotten smaller over time.
Yeah.
At this point, I think it would be safe to say that to do all the projects that were on the original list, even if we got grant money for all of those, and there's no guarantee that we get $1 million like we did for this one and for some others, Old Mill Boatyard, we got $1 million for a number of years ago. More than likely, just because of the passage of time and the escalation in costs and for manpower and material, some of these projects may need some supplemental appropriation. Now, the other funding source that we have that I touched on briefly is the WOOF. We have the waterway user fee account. And as of August 31st of this year, that had a balance of a little over $1.5 million in it. It can be used to support various projects along the waterfronts for design, permitting, construction, repair, replacement. So, it's specifically set up for capital type projects. We haven't proposed to use that for this project just because of timing purposes. In order to get the funds out of the WOOF, and we're limited to only $500,000 a year. That was the town meeting vote in 2022 was to authorize expenditure up to $500,000. I'm hoping to work with the finance director that next year that cap will basically be $1 million. And that was originally, $150,000 because that's basically all that was in the account, but over the years it's increased. But in order to use that, we have to get input, or we have to at least approach all the various waterways committees to get their input. So given the timing for that and the relatively short time frame that we had to try to get this project out on the street and then, get the bids in and get the contractor signed up, we decided not to seek any of the WOOF money for this particular project. However, as explained, in the memo, we have recently received a bid for the shelter building at the trap dock because we bid that in late summer as well. The bid came in, significantly above what we were anticipating. It is currently undergoing review by GEI as well as Pomeroy. We have also asked Pomeroy to engage a third-party estimator to provide an updated estimate for that project so we can compare that to the one and only bid that we received. If that all comes together here in the next couple of weeks, which we anticipate it will, we would probably then seek to use the WOOF to fund that project. It won't be anywhere near $1 million. It's going to be significantly less, probably than $500,000. But by the time we get the construction and owner's project manager and engineer, we'll probably be close to $500,000. So we're proposing to use the WOOF for that because we have a little bit more time to get that pulled together, get it out to the committees, and see whether or not there's any issues with using the WOOF. That would still leave roughly $1 million in the WOOF as of this August. Now, remember, the WOOF is constantly being replenished every year with mooring fees and docking fees and fuel fees and lease fees and whatnot at the fish pier. And so that will provide then another funding source for 90 Bridge Street. Recognizing that 90 Bridge Street is going to be a fairly large ticket item as well. But again, we're anticipating Seaport Economic Council grant funding for that. Hopefully at $1 million, we'd probably have $1 million or somewhere north of $1 million from the WOOF that we could put towards that. So we're trying to take this money, the original bond money, and leverage it as far as we can with some of these other funding sources. As I indicated in the memo, we have been working with the Gulf of Maine Institute, who had a federal grant to help fishing ports throughout the Gulf of Maine. And we've been able to work with them to the tune of about $77,000 to put an ice machine and an ice storage room in the trap dock shelter building, which was something we had not originally anticipated. But when this grant opportunity working with them came along, we've been working with them for probably about 1.5 years now on that. You know, it's taken a little bit longer because of COVID and everything else. But it looks like, you know, we'll be able to get that ice machine and storage room funded from that source. So again, we're trying to leverage as many other sources as we can. And, you know, for 90 Bridge Street, the Shellfish Department will also be looking at some of their funding sources. We did apply for a Kennedy Salt Install grant a number of years ago regarding the upweller. We were not successful, but there is funding like that out there available. And also, as you're well aware, there is now ARPA funding at the federal level, and there's a lot of ARPA money floating around that we hope to tap into for some of these other projects as well.
All right, thank you, Bob. Got it. That was good. That was a great explanation. Corey and then Shereen.
Dr. Bob, it's about 2 cents worth. When we're talking about the WOLF funding and how it's going to be used and having to bring it to the various waterway committees and stuff, it probably would be some benefit to reach out to the various, waterway committees and see if they have any thoughts on other things that the WOLF fund could be used for, to preempt some of the, discussion on a specific topic or two that may be brought forward, and kind of get everyone on board and on the same page, because it could take a little bit of a process with so many players, but I'd recommend doing that sooner than later so we can keep things rolling.
Yeah, no, we have plans to have that kind of discussion with them. It's just been a question of getting some of those various committees together. Hopefully now that we're in the fall season, that will be a little bit easier.
I understand.
So the deal with the 11-4, when we passed at the bond issue, that projects would return to the select board for our approval and our vote. So we do need a motion this evening to approve the 3-9 or whatever. Oh, Ms. Davis.
I did want to just make a note about the Gulf of Maine's Research Institute. That was a USDA grant that they had received. They work with some of the local fishermen, and they approached the town about this opportunity to get the ice machine. I think that was during COVID.
Excellent.
Yep.
So I'm going to make a motion to endorse the use of the waterfront bond for the Fish Pier South Jog Bulkhead Replacement Project, including alternate one in the amount of $3,976,000. $3,976,010.
Super. Okay, a vote. Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro.
Aye.
And the chair certainly says aye as well. Thank you very much, Bob, for your time and a great report. And thanks, folks that were in attendance here this evening, for your attentions. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, our
Thank
last
you.
order of business is a committee appointment to the Cultural Council. We interviewed a wonderful candidate tonight, Carolyn Parker. I'll entertain a motion. Mr. Metters.
Mr. Chair, I move to appoint Carolyn Parker to the Cultural Council until June 30th, 2025, unless sooner revoked or successor is appointed.
Super.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Shell. Okay, Mr. Metters, what say you?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro?
Aye.
And Chair says aye as well. Motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Nacastro?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Mr. Metters?
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. Good night, Chatham. Thank you very much.